The desert had no name on any map. The Marines called it Grid Reference 38 SMB 4521 because that was its coordinates, and in war, men need something to call the places where they might die. February 1991. The ground offensive of Operation Desert Storm had just begun, though none of the Marines advancing into Kuwait knew the war would be over in 100 hours. They only knew that Iraqi forces surrounded them in numbers impossible to count accurately, and that every morning brought artillery from positions deep in territory Americans could not reach. Corporal James Hawthorne was 20 years old. He lay behind a berm of sand and rubble on the outskirts of Kuwait City, eye pressed to the scope of an M40 rifle that the Marine Corps had issued him 6 months earlier. Beside him, Corporal Robert Brennan worked the spotting scope, calling ranges and wind speeds in a voice kept deliberately calm, despite the mortar rounds walking up the street toward their position. 20 feet away, Private Vincent Kane huddled against his radio, young enough that peach fuzz still dusted his jaw, old enough that he had already seen 3 men die. The Iraqi machine gun position was 800 meters down. Range, hidden in a building that American airstrikes had somehow missed. It had been chewing up a Marine rifle platoon for 20 minutes, pinning them in an intersection where the concrete offered no cover and the sand turned dark with blood. Hawthorne watched through his scope as men tried to crawl towards safety and died in the attempt. He counted 12 Marines still moving. He counted 4 who would never move again. His hands did not shake. At 20, with 88 confirmed kills already marked in the small notebook he kept in his breast pocket, his hands were as steady as Kansas stone. He had not yet learned that hands could shake, had not yet discovered that the human nervous system keeps a ledger of every life taken, and that eventually, decades later, that ledger comes due. Brennan called the corrections in the clipped language snipers use when mathematics becomes a matter of life and death. 800 meters, wind 5 miles per hour, right to left, temperature 112 degrees, air shimmering with heat that made distance calculations difficult. Target moving, lead him 3 feet. Hawthorne exhaled half his breath and held it. The world narrowed to the small circle of his scope, to the crosshairs settling on a point in space where a human being would be in precisely 1 second. He squeezed the trigger with the same pressure he might use to hold a baby bird, firm but gentle, inexorable but not rushed. The rifle spoke its single syllable of violence. 800 meters away, the Iraqi gunner's head snapped back. He collapsed across his weapon, and the gun fell silent. The second gunner moved to take his place. Hawthorne worked the bolt, chambered another round, fired again. 2 seconds between shots. That gunner fell as well. A third tried to drag the weapon to a new position. Hawthorne put a bullet through his spine. For 4 minutes he worked, methodical as a surgeon, calm as a man sorting mail. 12 shots. 12 Iraqi soldiers dead or dying. The machine guns silent. In the intersection below, Marines scrambled towards safety, dragging their wounded, retrieving their dead. They would never know the name of the sniper who saved them, would never buy him the beer he was owed, would only know that someone, somewhere in that burning city, had reached out across 800 meters and changed the mathematics of their survival. When it was over, Brennan lowered the spotting scope and looked at Hawthorne with something between awe and fear. "That is 89 confirmed," he said. "You are going to be a legend, Hawk." Kane spoke from his position against the radio, his voice carrying the dark humor that men use when they cannot afford to feel what they actually feel. "Legends do not make it home, sir." The artillery came then, as it always came, Iraqi guns firing from positions so deep in Iraq that American planes could not touch them without starting a wider war. The 3 men dove into their position, a hole in the sand lined with sandbags and smelling of sweat and fear and the particular stink of men who had not bathed in weeks. The world above became percussion and chaos. Sand rained down through gaps in the sandbag roof. The earth itself seemed to scream. When silence finally returned, they emerged to find the landscape transformed. Craters where there had been street, buildings stripped to concrete skeletons, body parts scattered across terrain that looked like the surface of a hostile moon. Hawthorne stood in the center of it, 20 years old, covered in yellow dust, looking at the price of survival. "What are we dying for here?" he asked, not to Brennan or Kane specifically, but to the universe itself, to whatever deaf god presided over this wasteland of oil fires and death. Brennan put a hand on his shoulder. "Each other," he said. "Only thing that matters. We are dying for each other. 56 years later, Colonel James Hawthorne would remember those words and wonder if they had ever been true or if they were just a lie young men tell themselves so they can keep pulling triggers. The Montana morning came cold and clear, the way Montana mornings do in December when winter has settled in for the long campaign. Hawthorne sat on the porch of his ranch house, hands wrapped around a coffee mug for warmth, though the cold was not really the problem. The cold was never the problem. The problem was memory. The problem was time. The problem was the way the past refused to stay buried no matter how deep you dug the grave. He was 62 years old. The house behind him held 200 acres of grassland and pine forest, 3 horses in a barn that needed new paint, and rooms full of furniture that his dead wife had chosen. Mary had been gone 5 years now. Cancer had taken her the way artillery takes soldiers. A long siege, a slow reduction, until there was nothing left but the memory of what used to be. She had made him promise at the end that he would reconnect with their son. He had broken that promise the same way he had broken most promises in his life, not through malice but through the simple inability to be anyone other than who he was. The rifle lay across his lap, cleaned and oiled, though he had not fired it in 6 months. An M40A5, the modern evolution of the weapon he had carried in Desert Storm. He kept it maintained the way other men might tend a grave, ritual, and remembrance, a conversation with ghosts. His hands, resting on the stock, trembled slightly. They had started shaking 2 years ago, small tremors that grew worse when he tried to hold them steady. His doctor called it essential tremor, a benign condition common in aging. Hawthorne called it the bill come due, the body's final refusal to keep killing. Behind him, inside the house, the walls held his history in frames. Photographs from Kuwait, young men trying to smile for the camera while their eyes showed the strain of counting days until rotation home. Pictures from the wars that followed, older now, grayer, still willing to go wherever politicians pointed. Afghanistan, the last war, the one where he had finally been too old to carry a rifle but young enough to train the ones who did. And scattered among the war photos, the pieces of civilian life he had managed between deployments. Mary in her wedding dress, 1974, 2 years after he came home from Desert Storm, still trying to remember how to sleep without listening for incoming rockets. Their son Thomas at 6, holding a baseball glove Hawthorne had given him before leaving for Beirut. Thomas at 12, school picture, Hawthorne somewhere in the Persian Gulf. Thomas at 18, enlisting in the Army Rangers despite or perhaps because of his father, the photo showing a young man trying to prove something to someone who was never there to see it. They had not spoken in 3 years. Thomas had stopped calling after the 3rd unanswered voicemail, had stopped visiting after the funeral when Hawthorne could not find words adequate to grief, had built his life around the empty space where a father should have been. Hawthorne understood. He had been that empty space for most of Thomas's childhood, physically present for maybe a third of it, emotionally available for even less. You cannot raise a son from 7,000 miles away. You cannot teach him how to be a man through letters and phone calls and promises you know you will not keep. You can only damage him in ways that will take him decades to understand and longer to forgive. The phone inside the house rang. Hawthorne let it ring 4 times before setting down his coffee and rifle and walking inside, moving with the careful deliberation of a man whose knees remember every parachute jump, every forced march, every impact with foreign soil. The caller ID showed a number he had not seen in 5 years, a Virginia area code connected to a Pentagon office where generals go to finish their careers. He answered. "Hawk," the voice said, "I need you." General Robert Brennan, same man who had spotted for him in Kuwait, same man who had held his hand at Mary's funeral when Hawthorne could not stop shaking, same man whose daughter was marrying Hawthorne's son in 5 days, though Hawthorne had not been invited and would not have gone even if he had been. Brennan spoke for 5 minutes. Each sentence arrived like a bullet, precise and lethal. Thomas was marrying Sarah Brennan on December 20th. Brennan had received a death threat 2 days ago, a single message on his secure government phone. Shadow Protocol remembers, it said. Shadow Protocol was a black operations unit from the 90s, men Brennan had commanded and later exposed for war crimes in the Balkans. Men who had gone to prison or fled or died in the exposure. Men with long memories and longer grudges. Captain Rachel Morgan, Brennan continued, died 2 years ago in what was ruled a training accident in Alaska. She was the best sniper Hawthorne had ever trained, better even than he had been. A woman who had learned the craft so well that the Marine Corps made her an instructor at 25. She had written Hawthorne letters from Afghanistan, from Iraq, from every corner of the War on Terror, and he had written back with advice that felt inadequate even as he gave it. When her husband died in a Russian ambush in 2018, when she broke down and the Corps forced her into psychiatric treatment, Hawthorne had talked her through the darkness on late-night phone calls, where both of them said too much and not enough. When she died in Alaska, officially from falling through ice during a winter warfare exercise, Hawthorne had known immediately that it was murder. A sniper of her caliber does not fall through ice. Someone puts a bullet in her from a distance and makes it look accidental. Shadow Protocol killed her, Brennan said. I have proof now. They murdered her because she was investigating them. She knew they were reforming, knew someone high up was protecting them. And now they are coming for Sarah, coming for my family. You are the only one I trust. Hawthorne stood in his kitchen, phone pressed to his ear, looking out the window at land that suddenly felt very far from the wars he had thought were behind him. I am 62, Robert, he said, hands shake, eyes failing. I am not that man anymore. Brennan's response came quiet but absolute. You are the only man for this, because you know what we lost in those deserts. You know what honor means, and you are Thomas's father. You have a right to be there. Thomas does not want me there. Then this is your chance to fix it. One last mission, like old times. Hawthorne looked down at his hands. They were shaking now, not from age, but from the knowledge of what Brennan was asking. You train snipers for 30 years. You create instruments of precision death. You teach them patience and mathematics and the cold calculus of taking human life at distances where you never see the faces. And then one day someone you train dies. And you realize that all your knowledge, all your kills, 327 men whose lives you ended across 5 decades of war, none of it was enough to protect the one person who mattered. Send me the details, Hawthorne said. The drive to Cathedral, Montana took 6 hours through mountain passes still navigable before the real snow came. Hawthorne drove his pickup truck, a diesel Ford that burned oil and had 200,000 miles on the odometer, but still ran because he maintained it the way he maintained weapons, with care and without sentiment. The rifle rode in a hard case in the truck bed, alongside a spotting scope, rangefinder, ballistic calculator, and a Colt 1911 pistol he had carried since Desert Storm, because some tools become part of your body. He drove and remembered Rachel, how she had arrived at Scout Sniper School in 2010, 22 years old, angry and determined in equal measure. Her father had died in Desert Storm, saving Robert Brennan's life during the same kind of ambush that had marked Kuwait City, history rhyming across the same war. She wanted to honor him by becoming what he had been, a protector at distance, a solver of tactical problems, a person who could reach out across impossible space and change outcomes. Hawthorne had been 48 then, chief instructor, his reputation cemented by wars most of his students had been too young to remember. He made them understand on the first day that sniping was not about glory or counts or proving anything. It was about mathematics and patience and the willingness to carry a weight most humans were not designed to bear. Every kill takes a piece of your soul, he told them. By the time you are my age, you might not recognize yourself. Some of them believed him. Most did not. Rachel believed him and chose to do it anyway. She became the best student he ever taught. Not the best shot, though she was exceptional, but the most complete sniper. The one who understood that the craft was 90% preparation and patience and only 10% pulling triggers. She graduated top of her class in 2013, deployed to Afghanistan, came back with stories she could not tell, and eyes that had learned to see what most people never see. She married Daniel Hayes, another sniper, and Hawthorne attended the wedding, feeling like a father watching his daughter marry, complicated and proud and afraid for what he knew was coming. Daniel died in 2018 in Russia's Ural Mountains, bleeding out from a femoral artery wound, while Rachel provided overwatch from 2,000 meters away, too far to help, close enough to hear him die over the radio. She broke after that. Truly broke. The Corps sent her to psychiatric treatment where she spent 3 months learning that some trauma does not heal. It only becomes something you carry. Hawthorne called her every week during that time, two broken people trying to convince each other that survival was worth the cost. When she recovered enough to return to duty, The Corps made her an instructor. She was too valuable to waste, too damaged to send back to combat. She taught for 2 years at Fort Bragg, then volunteered for Arctic warfare training in Alaska. Said she needed the isolation, the cold, the distance from everything. 6 months later, she was dead. Training accident, the official report said, fell through ice during a solo navigation exercise. Hawthorne had flown to Alaska for the funeral. Closed casket. He had stood there knowing that someone had murdered her, knowing that her death was connected to something larger, knowing that the Corps and the government and everyone involved would rather file it as accident than investigate what it really was. He had gone home and gotten drunk for the first time in 30 years, and when Thomas called to check on him, to offer whatever comfort an estranged son could offer, Hawthorne had not answered the phone. Now driving through Montana mountains, he understood that every choice has a price, and every debt eventually comes due. Cathedral, Montana held 3,000 souls in winter and maybe 4,000 in summer, when the tourists came to see the Gothic church that gave the town its name. The cathedral had been built in 1880 by German immigrants who wanted to recreate the grandeur of their homeland in the American West. Stone and spires and stained glass rising from mountain earth. Improbable and magnificent. Around it, the town had grown in the organic way small towns grow, Main Street and churches and schools, and the slow accumulation of lives lived far from anywhere important. Hawthorne checked into a motel on the edge of town, single story, clean but not fancy, the kind of place where a man could come and go without attracting attention. He unloaded his gear, laid it out on the bed with the precision of ritual. Rifle, scope, ammunition, calculator, maps. The tools of his trade, unchanged in essentials despite 50 years of technological advancement. A sniper's work remained the same. Find position. Calculate range, wind, temperature, humidity. A dozen variables that could turn a perfect shot into a miss and a miss into a catastrophe. Wait, breathe, squeeze. Live with what comes after. He drove to a shooting range 10 miles outside town, paid the fee, set up at the 100-meter rifle lane. The range officer, a man in his 40s with the look of someone who had done time in uniform, recognized quality when he saw it. Nice rifle, he said. You shoot competition? Used to, Hawthorne replied, just keeping sharp now. He loaded 3 rounds, settled into position, controlled his breathing, tried to control the shaking in his hands. The tremor was worse when he was tired, worse when he was stressed, worse when he thought too much about what he was doing. He fired. The first shot hit 4 inches left of center. The second missed the target entirely. The third clipped the edge. The range officer watched without comment. Sometimes the body knows things the mind refuses to accept. Sometimes the instrument realizes before the operator that it is no longer fit for the work. Hawthorne packed up and left without speaking. He drove back to the motel and sat on the bed with the rifle across his lap and understood with perfect clarity that he was not ready for what Brennan had asked him to do. But ready or not, he had given his word. And some promises you keep, even when keeping them, might destroy you. The rehearsal dinner happened at the cathedral itself. 50 guests in a reception hall attached to the main building. Military dress uniforms and civilian formal wear. The careful mixing of worlds that happens when soldiers marry. Hawthorne arrived late, deliberately, hoping to avoid the attention that comes with being both father of the groom and a stranger to most present. He wore his dress blues, the uniform he had not put on in 5 years, surprised that it still fit though the chest felt tighter and the shoulders seemed to hold weight differently than he remembered. He saw Thomas first, across the room, talking with a group of younger Army Rangers, his son now 35 years old and looking like a man who had been forged in the same fires that had forged his father. Thomas wore his dress uniform with the bearing of someone who had earned every decoration on it, combat infantry badge and ranger tab and ribbons that told a story of Iraq and Afghanistan and the long war that kept producing new ways to damage young men. He laughed at something one of his friends said, the kind of easy laughter that Hawthorne had never quite managed, had never learned the trick of setting down the weight long enough to be light. Thomas looked up, saw his father, and the laughter died. His face did something complicated, surprise and anger and something that might have been pain, all of it controlled and pushed down in the way Rangers learn to control themselves. He crossed the room with purpose, stopped 3 feet away, close enough for conversation but far enough to maintain distance. "What are you doing here?" he said. Not a question, an accusation. "General Brennan invited me," Hawthorne replied. "Wanted to see you happy. Now you care. Where were you my whole childhood? Always at war, always leaving. Even when you were home, you were still in the desert." The words landed like bullets in center mass, accurate and lethal. Hawthorne had no defense because there was no defense. Everything Thomas said was true. He had been absent. He had been distant. He had let the wars define him so completely that there was no room left for anything else. Not for Mary, not for Thomas, not for the ordinary work of being human. Before he could respond, a young woman approached, mid-20s, beautiful in the way that happiness makes people beautiful, radiating the particular glow that comes from believing the future will be good. She slipped her arm through Thomas's, looked at Hawthorne with something between curiosity and caution. "You must be Colonel Hawthorne," she said. "Thomas has told me a lot about you." The tone was diplomatic, the words chosen carefully, but Hawthorne could read subtext the way he could read wind. She knew he had failed his son. She was being polite because the wedding was in 2 days and scenes could wait until after. "Sarah Brennan," he said, "congratulations. You are marrying a good man, better than his father." She smiled, uncertain how to respond. Thomas pulled her gently away, back toward his friends, leaving Hawthorne standing alone in a room full of people who knew each other and shared histories he was not part of. General Robert Brennan found him 10 minutes later, pulled him into a side office where they could speak privately. Brennan looked older than the last time they had seen each other. Heavier, grayer, the weight of 4 stars and 40 years of service showing in the lines around his eyes and the set of his shoulders. But his grip when they shook hands was still strong, his eyes still sharp. "Shadow Protocol sent another message yesterday," Brennan said without preamble. "Wedding gift incoming." That is all it said. Security is tight, 12 military police, metal detectors, perimeter patrols. But these are professionals, Hawk. They will find a way. He spread blueprints of the cathedral on the desk, showed Hawthorne the layout, the sight lines, the vulnerabilities. The ceremony would have 200 guests, mostly military, some politicians, people whose deaths would make headlines. Sarah would be exposed at the altar. Thomas would be exposed. Everyone would be exposed because that was the nature of weddings. You gathered everyone you loved in one place and made them vulnerable to demonstrate faith in the goodness of the future. "I need you on Overwatch," Brennan said. "Old school, like Kuwait. Find a position. Watch. If they make a move, you stop them." Hawthorne looked at the blueprints. 800 meters from the cathedral stood an abandoned church, Gothic revival like its larger cousin, built in 1890 and closed in 1950 when the congregation could no longer maintain it. It had a bell tower, stone construction, perfect sight lines to the main cathedral's entrance and altar area. Perfect position for a sniper. "My hands shake," he said. "What if I miss?" Brennan looked at him with the absolute certainty of a man who had seen him work. "You never missed when it mattered. 327 confirmed kills, Hawk. That instinct does not fade." It was the wrong number. The actual count was 342, but some kills stayed classified even between old friends. Hawthorne did not correct him. After the rehearsal dinner, after the speeches and toasts and the careful performance of families blending, Hawthorne found Thomas in the parking lot, standing alone beside a rental car, looking up at Montana stars that blazed in the cold December sky. The temperature had dropped to 15 degrees, breath fogging in the air, the kind of cold that finds every gap in your clothing and reminds you that winter here does not forgive. "Son," Hawthorne said. Thomas turned. "Do not call me that. You do not get to call me that. Not after 3 years of silence. Not after a lifetime of absence." The words should have hurt. They did hurt. But Hawthorne had learned in Kuwait that you can function through pain. If the mission requires it, you can keep moving with wounds that should stop you. You can do what needs doing and save the bleeding for later. "I know I failed you," he said. "No, I was never the father you deserved. Was too broken from the wars, too full of ghosts. Your mother understood. She tried to help me carry it. When she died, I had no one." "You had me," Thomas said. His voice cracked slightly, the anger breaking to show the hurt underneath. "You had me and you shut me out. Stopped answering calls, stopped showing up, just disappeared into that ranch like you were already dead." Hawthorne wanted to explain that he had been protecting Thomas from the darkness, that he had been afraid his damage would infect his son, that he had thought distance was kindness. But explanations were just excuses, and excuses were lies you told yourself when the truth was too hard to face. The truth was he had been a coward. The truth was he had run from the one person he should have run toward. You ever kill someone, son? Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Yes, he said finally. Afghanistan, 7 men. Then you know it does not leave you. Those faces, those moments. Mary understood. She helped me carry it. When she died, I had no one who could understand. You had me, Thomas repeated, and I could have understood, could have tried, but you never gave me the chance. They stood there in the Montana cold, father and son, two men shaped by the same profession, damaged in similar ways, unable to bridge the gap that years in silence had created. Hawthorne wanted to say something profound, something that would fix what he had broken, but he had never been good with words. He had only ever been good with distances and mathematics in the cold work of killing. Enjoy the wedding, Thomas said. Then leave my life. I am done trying. He got in his car and drove away. Hawthorne stood alone in the parking lot and whispered to the empty air, I am trying to save your life, son, even if you never forgive me. Even if this is the last thing I ever do, I am trying to save your life. 2 days before the wedding, Hawthorne began his preparation. He drove to the abandoned church in early morning darkness, parked a mile away, approached on foot through forests that still held patches of snow from the last storm. The church rose from the landscape like a tombstone. Stone walls weathered and beautiful, roof partially collapsed, windows empty of glass. The bell tower stood intact, 40 feet of spiral stairs leading to an observation platform that would have commanded the town when the church was built. He climbed carefully, testing each step for structural integrity, moving with the deliberate pace of a man who understands that carelessness kills. The top platform was 8 feet square, open to the weather, offering unobstructed view of the cathedral 800 meters away. Perfect position. But modern security would scan with thermal imaging, would detect his heat signature, would compromise the overwatch before the wedding even began. He needed to hide in a way that predated technology, in a way that relied on patience and discipline instead of electronics. He needed to do what he had done in Kuwait when Iraqi spotters watched the city with Soviet optics and Chinese training. He needed to become part of the earth itself. 50 meters from the church, in a small depression that would be invisible from the road, he began to dig. The ground was frozen at the surface but soft beneath, mountain soil that had not yet surrendered completely to winter. He dug for 3 hours methodically, creating a space 7 feet long, 3 feet wide, 2 feet deep, large enough for a man lying prone, deep enough to hide thermal signature beneath layers of earth and insulation. He lined it with thermal blankets from a camping supply store, created a breathing tube from PVC pipe camouflaged with local vegetation, positioned the rifle at precise angle toward the cathedral. He would enter this hide 48 hours before the wedding, would lie in it without moving, would wait with the patience that 50 years of sniping had taught him. Modern soldiers with their drones and thermal scopes would look for heat signatures above ground. They would not think to scan beneath the frost line for a man buried alive. He tested the position, lay in it for 6 hours, confirmed sight lines and breathing apparatus, and the 1,000 small details that mean the difference between success and failure. His body protested. At 62, lying motionless in frozen earth felt different than it had at 20. His joints ached, his back cramped. But discomfort was not the same as inability. He had done this in Kuwait for 3 days straight, had learned then that the human body can endure more than the human mind believes possible. When he climbed out, stiff and cold but satisfied, he understood that he was committing to something irreversible. Once he entered that hide, once the wedding began, he would have to see it through to whatever end awaited. He would be buried alive, watching his son marry, knowing that someone in that cathedral intended violence, knowing that his shaking hands and failing eyes might be all that stood between 200 people and catastrophe. He returned to the motel, showered until the hot water ran cold, slept in short troubled bursts where Kuwait and Afghanistan and every war blurred together into one long continuous combat. He woke at 3 in the morning and could not return to sleep. He sat on the edge of the bed with his head in his hands and felt the weight of 62 years pressing down, felt every life he had taken and every person he had failed to protect, felt the accumulated burden of being a man who had spent his entire adult life in service of violence. The morning of December 18th, 48 hours before the wedding, he packed supplies into a waterproof bag. Water, protein bars, medications, a waste bag, the tools of extended surveillance. He loaded his rifle, checked and rechecked every component, cleaned it one final time, though it was already immaculate. At 4 in the morning, in darkness absolute, he drove to his parking spot and hiked to the hide. He entered it like entering a grave, feet first, sliding down, pulling the camouflage cover over himself, settling into position with the rifle barrel emerging through a cunningly designed port that would be invisible from more than 10 feet away. The earth closed around him. The cold pressed in. He controlled his breathing, slowed his heart rate, began the meditation practice that would sustain him for the next 2 days. Time became strange, the way it always does on Overwatch. Seconds stretched into minutes, minutes compressed into seconds. He drifted between memory and present, between then and now. He was 20 in Kuwait and 62 in Montana, and every age between, all versions of himself existing simultaneously in the dark earth. He thought about Mary, about the promises he had broken. He thought about Thomas, about the childhood he had missed. He thought about Rachel, about how he had trained her to be perfect and that perfection had not been enough to keep her alive. 48 hours in a hide gives a man time to understand things he has been avoiding his entire life. Hawthorne understood finally that he had been running from himself for 50 years, running from the boy who went to war and never came home, running from the things he had done in service to his country and the cost of those things, running from the knowledge that you cannot kill 342 human beings and remain entirely human yourself. But running was over. Whatever came next, whatever happened at that wedding, he would face it with eyes open. He would protect his son even if his son hated him. He would honor the memory of Rachel by finishing what she had started investigating. He would prove to the ghosts that followed him that some things were still worth fighting for. The wedding morning arrived cold and bright. Through his scope, Hawthorne watched the cathedral come alive. Staff arriving early, florists and caterers and musicians, the ordinary machinery of celebration. Security teams swept the building, deployed in positions Brennan had mapped. Military police in dress uniforms, Secret Service for the political guests, private security for the civilian VIPs. They were professional, thorough, exactly as competent as they needed to be to stop any conventional threat. But Hawthorne had learned in 5 decades of war that the real threats are never conventional. The real threats come from the angles you do not expect, from the people you trust, from the moments when you believe you are finally safe. At noon, guests began arriving. Hawthorne scanned each face through his scope, cataloging, comparing against the mental database of known Shadow Protocol operatives that Brennan had provided. He saw generals and colonels and the political animals who feed on military valor. He saw Thomas's ranger friends, young men with old eyes. He saw civilian guests who looked uncomfortable in formal wear. Relatives and neighbors who had probably never attended a military wedding before. At 1:15, a catering van arrived late. 4 men emerged wearing white jackets and black pants, pushing carts loaded with covered dishes. They moved wrong. Hawthorne saw it immediately, the way his instructor's eye had been trained to see it. They moved with tactical awareness, scanning corners, maintaining spacing, checking sight lines unconsciously. These were not caterers. These were operators. He zoomed his scope on faces. The first 3 he did not recognize, but the 4th, directing the others with subtle hand signals, was a face from a different lifetime. Vincent Kane, 58 years old now, heavier than he had been at 19, but unmistakable. The radio operator from Kuwait, the private who had predicted that legends do not make it home. The man who had helped create Shadow Protocol in the 90s and had been court-martialed when Brennan exposed the unit's war crimes. Kane was inside the cathedral, inside the security perimeter, inside the last place he should be. Hawthorne keyed his radio, contacted Brennan on the encrypted frequency. Hostile inside, he transmitted. Vincent Kane came in with catering. 4 operators minimum. I have visual. Brennan's response came tight with controlled alarm. Ushibai, I am. Do not engage. Maintain overwatch. I am alerting security now. But something made Hawthorne keep watching. Some instinct developed over 50 years of reading tactical situations. He scanned the cathedral windows, looking for Kane, tracking his movement through the building. found him in a second-floor room, talking with someone. Hawthorne adjusted zoom, brought the scene into sharp focus. The someone was Thomas. His son stood in profile, listening as Kane spoke, nodding occasionally. Kane handed Thomas something, small enough to fit in a palm. Thomas examined it, turned it over, studying. From this distance, through a window, Hawthorne could not be certain what it was, but the shape, the size, the careful way Kane presented it, and Thomas accepted it, looked exactly like a detonator. Thomas pocketed the device. Kane said something else. Thomas nodded. They shook hands. Not the handshake of enemies or strangers. The handshake of colleagues, of conspirators. The scope shook in Hawthorne's hands. Not from tremor now. From the thing a father feels when he understands that his son, his only son, the child he failed to raise properly but loved in his broken way, has become the threat. He keyed the radio. "Robert," he said, voice steady despite the earthquake in his chest. "We have a problem. The inside man. It is Thomas. My son is Shadow Protocol." Silence on the radio. Long seconds where Hawthorne could hear his own heartbeat, loud as artillery in his ears. "Say again," Brennan finally replied. "Thomas is the threat. I just watched Kane give him what looks like a detonator." They shook hands like partners. "Robert, my son is going to kill your daughter. Going to kill everyone in that cathedral. And I am the only one who can stop him." More silence. Then Brennan's voice, carrying the weight of impossible choices. "What do you need?" "I need to get inside," Hawthorne said. "Need to get close enough to stop him before he activates whatever Kane planted. But if I leave this position, if he sees me, he will execute immediately. And if I do not leave this position, if I just stay here watching, 200 people die, and I have to live with knowing I could have stopped it. Can you take the shot from there?" The question that had been coming since the moment Hawthorne saw Thomas pocket that device. Could he, from 800 meters away, with shaking hands and failing eyes, put a bullet through his own son? Could he do the one thing that his entire life of violence had supposedly been protecting Thomas from? Could he become the monster he had always feared he was? "I do not know," he said, hands shake. "Might miss. Might hit Sarah instead. Might hit someone else. It would have to be a headshot to stop him instantly. Anything else, he has time to trigger the device." "Then what do you recommend?" Hawthorne watched his son through the scope, watched him check his watch, adjust his dress uniform, smile at something Kane said. His son who he had failed to raise, his son who had become a killer because, or despite having a killer for a father. His son who was about to murder a cathedral full of people, including the woman he had claimed to love. "Tell me, old friend," Hawthorne said quietly, "what would you do? Because I trained my hands to kill 342 men over 50 years. Trained them to be steady and precise and merciless. But I never trained my heart to kill the one person I should have loved better. Never prepared for the day when my son would be standing in my crosshairs. Never imagined that the last shot of my life would be the one that destroys everything I have left." The radio crackled. Brennan's voice came back, carrying 50 years of friendship and war and shared trauma. "Do what you have to do, Hawk. What you train for. What you are. Save my daughter. Save everyone you can. And know that whatever happens, whatever choice you make, you are still my brother. Still the man who saved me in Kuwait. Still the best Marine I ever knew." Hawthorne lowered the radio, settled the scope, found Thomas in the crosshairs. His son's face filled the lens, familiar and strange. The face of a man Hawthorne had helped create but never really knew. His finger moved to the trigger, pressure beginning, the same pressure he had applied 342 times before. The pressure that separated living humans from corpses. The pressure that made him what he was. In 2 hours, the wedding would begin. In 2 hours, Thomas would have opportunity to activate whatever Kane had given him. In 2 hours, Hawthorne would have to choose between his son and everything his son planned to destroy. The scope shook. His hand shook. His heart shook. But his finger remained on the trigger, and in the frozen earth of Montana, an old sniper prepared to take the hardest shot of his life. The shot that would either save 200 people or damn his own soul. The shot that would prove whether a lifetime of violence could finally be redeemed or whether it only ever created more violence, spiraling outward until everyone was damaged and nothing was left but the counting of bodies. Thomas moved away from the window. Hawthorne tracked him through the scope until he disappeared into the cathedral's interior. The count had begun. 2 hours until ceremony. 2 hours until Hawthorne would discover whether a father could shoot his own son, whether mercy and duty could exist in the same heart, whether anything he had fought for across 5 decades of war had been worth the cost. The Montana wind picked up, cold and sharp. Snow began to fall, small flakes that would complicate his shot, that would add one more variable to the already impossible mathematics of what he was being asked to do. In the distance, church bells began to ring, calling the faithful to worship, calling the damned to reckon, calling everyone to witness whatever bloody resolution awaited in that cathedral of stone and stained glass and shared American sins. The snow fell heavier now, thick flakes that obscured vision and complicated mathematics. Hawthorne lay in his frozen hide, scope trained on the cathedral, watching his son move through the building like a ghost among the living. Thomas stopped to shake hands with arriving guests, smiled at cousins he had not seen in years, embraced his future father-in-law with what looked like genuine affection. The performance was flawless. If Hawthorne had not seen him pocket the detonator, had not watched him conspire with Vincent Kane, he would have believed his son was simply a nervous groom preparing for the most important day of his life. But Hawthorne had spent 50 years learning to see what others missed. The slight tension in Thomas's shoulders, the way his right hand kept drifting to his jacket pocket where the device rested. The professional scan he gave each room before entering, checking exits and sight lines with the automatic awareness of someone trained to operate in hostile territory. These were not the movements of a groom. These were the movements of an operator preparing for mission execution. Through his radio earpiece, Hawthorne heard Brennan coordinating with security teams. The general's voice remained calm, decades of command and allowing him to function through crisis. But Hawthorne could detect the strain underneath. Brennan was ordering a discreet lockdown, positioning military police at every exit, bringing in bomb detection dogs under the pretext of routine security sweeps. He was trying to contain the threat without causing panic, trying to stop a massacre without starting one. But Hawthorne knew the truth that Brennan was only beginning to understand. You cannot stop a determined operator who has already penetrated your security perimeter. You cannot search every corner of a building that size in 2 hours. And you cannot arrest the groom of a wedding without creating the exact panic and chaos that might trigger whatever Thomas had planned. The scope tracked Thomas as he climbed stairs to the second floor, disappeared into a room that the blueprints marked as a storage area for church supplies. Hawthorne waited. Patience was the sniper's primary weapon. Most people could not sit still for 30 seconds without fidgeting. A trained sniper could remain motionless for hours, could slow his breathing and heart rate to the point where his body became part of the landscape, could wait with the serene confidence that eventually the target would present itself. 3 minutes later, Thomas emerged. In that 3 minutes, he had done something, planted something, hidden something. The room he had entered would need to be searched, but searching it might trigger a secondary device, might accelerate the timeline, might be exactly what Shadow Protocol wanted. Hawthorne keyed his radio. He went into the second floor storage room, East Wing. 3 minutes inside. Recommend bomb squad, but careful approach. If this is sophisticated, they will have pressure sensors, motion detectors, backup triggers. Brennan's response came after a pause. Bomb squad is 15 minutes out. Wedding starts in 90 minutes. If we evacuate now, if we cause a scene, does that trigger the attack? It was the question neither of them wanted to ask because there was no good answer. Shadow Protocol had been planning this for at least 2 years, possibly longer. They would have contingencies. If the wedding was canceled, they might execute anyway, might detonate whatever they had planted and kill dozens of security personnel. If the wedding proceeded, they might wait until the cathedral was completely full before striking. The only certainty was that they had planned for every obvious countermove. Your call, Hawthorne said. You were ground commander. I am just Overwatch. The lie was transparent. Hawthorne was not just Overwatch. He was a father watching his son prepare to commit mass murder. He was a man who had killed more people than most soldiers ever see, discovering that none of that experience had prepared him for this particular species of horror. Tell me about Thomas, Brennan said. The question came quiet, almost gentle. When did you last really talk to him? When did you last know what he was thinking? Hawthorne had to reach back through years of silence and distance. The last real conversation had been at Mary's funeral 5 years ago. Thomas had been 30 then, already a ranger, already decorated, already well into whatever transformation had led him to this moment. They had stood together at the graveside after everyone else had left, father and son united in grief but separated by everything else. Thomas had said, "She asked me to take care of you, made me promise I would not let you disappear into that ranch and drink yourself to death." Hawthorne had replied, "I do not need taking care of." "Everyone needs someone," Thomas had said, "even you, especially you." But Hawthorne had not been able to accept that help, had not been able to let his son see the full extent of his damage, had driven back to Montana alone and had not answered the phone when Thomas called to check on him, had not answered the second call or the third, had let the silence build until it became a wall neither of them could climb. Now lying in frozen earth, watching through a scope as that same son prepared to murder innocents, Hawthorne understood that his silence had been a kind of violence itself. He had abandoned Thomas to figure out manhood alone, to process his own combat trauma without guidance, to become whatever shadow protocol had shaped him into, because there had been no father present to shape him into anything better. "I do not know him," Hawthorne admitted to Brennan. "Have not known him since he was 12. Maybe never knew him at all. Just knew the idea of him, the son I wanted him to be instead of the son he actually was." "Then we are operating blind," Brennan said. "We do not know his motivations, his breaking points, his limits. We do not know if he is true believer or if shadow protocol has leverage on him. We do not know if he can be reasoned with or if he is past the point of reason." Hawthorne adjusted his scope, brought Thomas back into focus. His son had moved to the cathedral's main floor, was standing near the altar, looking up at the vaulted ceiling with an expression that might have been appreciation or might have been calculation. At this distance, through glass and snow, Hawthorne could not read his face clearly enough to know which. "What do you want me to do?" he asked Brennan. The question was simple, but its implications were infinite. Was Brennan asking him to take the shot? Asking him to kill Thomas before the wedding started, before whatever was planned could be executed? Or was he asking Hawthorne to find another way, some third option that did not involve a father shooting his son? "Stand by," Brennan said. "I am going to try something. If it works, we contain this without bloodshed. If it does not work, if Thomas makes a move towards Sarah or pulls that detonator, you do what you have to do. But Hawk, understand this. If you take that shot, if you kill your son, I will spend the rest of my life making sure everyone knows you died a hero, that you sacrificed everything to save innocence, that you were the best man I ever knew." The words were meant as comfort, but they landed like condemnation. Hawthorne did not want to be remembered as a hero. He wanted to be remembered by his son as a father. But that chance, if it had ever existed, was evaporating like morning dew under a harsh sun. Through the scope, he watched Brennan enter the cathedral's main floor, moving with the careful authority of a four-star general who still remembered how to be a combat officer. Brennan crossed to where Thomas stood, placed a hand on his shoulder in what would look to observers like a future father-in-law sharing a moment with his soon-to-be son-in-law. But Hawthorne could see the tension in both their bodies, could read the subtext of whatever was being said. Brennan's voice came through the radio, speaking to Thomas but broadcast to the security teams. "Son, I need you to come with me for a moment. Last-minute detail we need to discuss. Wedding coordinator stuff. Won't take long." Thomas turned to face him. Even through the scope, even across 800 meters, Hawthorne could see his son's expression change. The smile remained, but something shifted behind the eyes. Recognition. Calculation. The look of an operator realizing his cover might be compromised. "Sure," Thomas said. His voice carried through the cathedral's open doors, caught by the directional microphone Hawthorne had aimed at the building. "Lead the way." They walked together toward a side office, two men who looked comfortable with each other, who looked like family. But Hawthorne had seen enough interrogations, had participated in enough tactical debriefings to recognize what this was. Brennan was separating Thomas from the crowd, getting him away from Sarah and the guests, creating an opportunity to either reason with him or restrain him, depending on how the conversation developed. The office door closed behind them. Hawthorne lost visual. The directional microphone picked up muffled voices, but the walls were too thick, the distance too great. He would have to trust that Brennan, who had survived 40 years of military politics and actual combat, could handle one compromised ranger. But trust was a luxury Hawthorne had lost somewhere between his 342nd kill and the moment he saw his son shake hands with a terrorist. Minutes passed. The cathedral continued filling with guests. Sarah Brennan arrived in a limousine, stepped out in a white dress that caught the falling snow like silk catching light. She looked radiant and terrified in the way all brides look, the weight of expectation and hope visible in her bearing. Bridesmaids surrounded her, laughing and chattering, shepherding her toward a private room where she would wait until the ceremony began. She did not know that her groom was in an office being confronted by her father, did not know that the wedding might never happen, did not know that the man she loved might be planning to kill her. Hawthorne found himself hoping she would never have to know, hoping that somehow this would resolve without her world being destroyed. He had watched too many people lose their innocence, had been the instrument of that loss too many times. If there was any mercy left in the universe, Sarah Brennan would be spared the knowledge of what her fiancé had become. The office door opened. Thomas emerged first, moving fast, not running but close to it. His face was set, expression unreadable, right hand in his jacket pocket. Brennan followed, trying to keep up, calling Thomas's name. Security personnel began moving to intercept, but Thomas had chosen his angle well, had positioned himself so that cutting him off would require crossing through crowds of arriving guests. Hawthorne centered the crosshairs on Thomas's head. The shot was possible, difficult but possible. 800 meters, falling snow, wind variable, moving target, but possible. His finger moved to the trigger. Pressure began to build. The familiar sequence that he had executed 342 times before began to unfold, muscle memory taking over from conscious thought. But then Thomas stopped, simply stopped walking, turned, faced Brennan across 20 feet of cathedral floor. His hand came out of his pocket, holding not a detonator but a cell phone. He held it up so Brennan could see the screen. Through the scope, Hawthorne could not read what was displayed on that phone, but he could read Brennan's reaction, the way the general's face went pale, the way his shoulders sagged as though struck. Brennan's voice came through the radio, no longer speaking to Thomas but to the security teams. "Stand down," he said. "All units stand down. No threat. I repeat, no threat." Hawthorne did not lower his rifle. Years of training had taught him that you maintain sight picture until the mission is complete, until you are absolutely certain the threat has been neutralized. But his finger eased off the trigger, tension releasing slightly, waiting for confirmation. Brennan crossed to Thomas. They spoke briefly, then embraced. Not the embrace of enemies or opponents, the embrace of two men sharing a burden. When they separated, Brennan was wiping his eyes. The general's voice came through the radio, speaking directly to Hawthorne now. "Hawk, stand down. Thomas is not the threat. He is undercover, has been for 18 months. Deep cover operation run by Army intelligence. He is inside Shadow Protocol, gathering evidence. What you saw was Kane passing him the detonator location so Thomas could disable it before the wedding. We have been playing this wrong from the start." The words reached Hawthorne's ears, but took several seconds to reach his brain, to be processed and understood. His son was not a terrorist. His son was a soldier doing what soldiers do, going into dark places to protect the innocent. His son had not betrayed everything, had not become the monster Hawthorne had feared he was becoming. But the relief that should have followed that understanding was complicated by a darker realization. For 15 minutes, Hawthorne had been prepared to kill Thomas, had centered the crosshairs on his son's head, had begun the trigger sequence that would have ended his child's life. And if Brennan had been 30 seconds slower in explaining, if Thomas had made one wrong movement, if the radio transmission had been delayed, Hawthorne would have fired. He would have killed his son to save strangers, would have proven himself to be exactly the monster he had always feared he was. His hands began to shake worse than before, not from age now, but from the adrenaline crash, from the proximity to irrevocable tragedy. The scope image blurred. He had to lower the rifle, had to take several deep breaths, had to remind himself that his son was alive, and that was what mattered. But another part of his mind, the part trained in tactical analysis, was already asking the questions that needed asking. If Thomas was undercover, why had Brennan not told him from the beginning? Why let Hawthorne spend 2 hours in a frozen hide believing his son was a terrorist? Why risk the exact scenario that had almost played out? The answer came quickly. Because the fewer people who knew about a deep cover operation, the safer the operator. Because even telling Brennan's closest friend represented a security risk. Because in the mathematics of intelligence work, one soldier's life was worth sacrificing to protect the larger mission. Hawthorne keyed the radio. How long have you known? He asked Brennan. The general's response came after a long pause. Since yesterday morning, Thomas contacted me directly, told me he had been ordered to infiltrate Shadow Protocol 2 years ago. Army intelligence suspected the unit was reforming, suspected someone high up was protecting them. Thomas volunteered because his connection to you and to me made him a perfect candidate. Shadow Protocol would trust the son of a legendary sniper who had trained most of their operators. Would trust someone who had reason to resent military authority because of an absent father. Each word was a small knife finding gaps in armor. Thomas had volunteered for an operation that required him to cut off all contact with his father. Had allowed Hawthorne to believe he was angry and distant when really he was working deep cover in one of the most dangerous assignments Army intelligence could offer. Had let their relationship deteriorate because maintaining that deterioration was part of his cover story. Why not tell me yesterday, Hawthorne asked. Why let me think I might have to shoot him? Because I needed your reaction to be genuine, Brennan said. Shadow Protocol has been watching all of us. If you had known Thomas was undercover, if you had acted differently, they might have detected it, might have blown his cover, might have killed him. I made the calculation that your temporary pain was worth his survival. I made the call that a commander has to make, and I will understand if you never forgive me for it. Hawthorne said nothing. There was nothing to say that would adequately express what he felt. The tangle of relief and rage and betrayal and understanding. Brennan had made the correct tactical decision. That did not make it hurt less. Through the scope, he watched Thomas return to the cathedral's main area, resume his role as groom. The performance continued seamlessly. No one watching would know that anything had happened, that 15 minutes ago, a father had almost killed his son, that a general had almost let it happen. The wedding machinery moved forward, guests finding seats, musicians tuning instruments, the ordinary preparation for a ceremony that was anything but ordinary. What is the actual threat, Hawthorne asked. If Thomas is clean, what are we defending against? Kane and his team have planted explosives throughout the cathedral, Brennan said. Thomas has the locations but not the access codes to disarm them. They are on a timer set to detonate during the vows. 20 minutes from now. Kane and his people are still inside, hidden among the catering staff. The plan is to detonate the charges, kill everyone in the cathedral, including Thomas and Sarah, then leak evidence that suggests this was revenge for Shadow Protocol being exposed. Make me look responsible. Destroy my career and my family in one operation. And Thomas's mission? Get close enough to Kane to obtain the disarm codes, then transmit them to the bomb squad. But Kane has not given him the codes yet, is waiting until the last possible moment, playing games, testing Thomas's loyalty. Where is Kane now? Unknown. Lost visual when he moved to the cathedral basement. Could be anywhere. Hawthorne scanned this building with systematic precision, checking every window, every door, every possible position. A man like Vincent Kane, trained by the same cadre that had trained Hawthorne, would not be easy to find. He would have a hide somewhere, a position that gave him control and observation, that allowed him to monitor his operation and ensure its success. The bell tower, Hawthorne said. That is where he is. Same place I would be. High ground, good sight lines, can see everything. Can trigger the detonators manually if the timer fails. How do you know? Because it is what I taught him 30 years ago at Fort Bragg. Always maintain high ground. Always have manual override for electronic systems. Always have the ability to execute mission even if everything else fails. If he is in the bell tower, he can see the approaches. We cannot get to him without him seeing us coming. I can, Hawthorne said, because he does not know I am here. Does not know I am buried 80 meters from his position. Does not know the old man he trained with in 1990 is currently tracking him through a scope. Are you saying what I think you are saying? I am saying that I am leaving this hide, going to the bell tower, taking Kane out of the equation. But you need to evacuate the cathedral, quietly, without triggering panic. Get everyone out while I deal with Kane. Negative, Brennan said. If we evacuate, Kane will know we are on to him. We'll detonate immediately. We have no choice but to let the wedding proceed while Thomas gets those codes. Then Thomas better work fast, because I am not lying in frozen earth while my son is inside a building wired to explode. Hawthorne began the process of extricating himself from the hide, slow and careful, each movement deliberate. After 48 hours in one position, his body protested. Joints had stiffened, Muscles had cramped. At 20, he could have emerged from a hide like this ready to sprint. At 62, he needed 5 minutes just to stand upright. But pain was irrelevant. Discomfort was irrelevant. His son was in danger, and that was the only calculation that mattered. He crawled out of his hide, staying low, using the terrain and falling snow for concealment. His ghillie suit, white fabric sown with local vegetation, made him nearly invisible against the winter landscape. He moved in the short, careful bounds that snipers use when they need to relocate. 3 seconds of movement followed by 30 seconds of stillness, letting the landscape absorb him before moving again. The abandoned church rose ahead, Gothic stone against gray sky. No lights in the windows. No obvious signs of occupation. But Hawthorne knew Cain was there the way he knew his own heartbeat. 40 years of training men to be snipers left you with an instinct for where they would position themselves. Cain would be in the bell tower, would have a rifle, would be watching the cathedral through a scope, would be waiting to ensure his operation succeeded. The approach took 20 minutes, each minute feeling like an hour. Hawthorne was hyper-aware that the wedding was proceeding, that guests were seated, that Sarah was preparing to walk down the aisle, that his son was somewhere inside trying to get disarm codes from a terrorist who might kill him at any moment. He reached the base of the abandoned church, pressed himself against the stone wall, listened. No sound from inside. The falling snow muffled everything, creating a silence so complete that Hawthorne could hear his own breathing, his own heartbeat, the small mechanical click of his rifle sling against a button. The church had 3 entrances. Main doors at the front, locked and likely trapped if Cain had been thorough. Side door to the north, partially collapsed, offering entry but also offering Cain a direct sightline. And a basement window to the south, small and mostly hidden by weeds, the kind of entrance that someone in a hurry might overlook. Hawthorne chose the basement window, moved to it, used his knife to pry the frame, slipped inside into darkness absolute. The basement smelled of rot and time, decades of abandonment compressed into a scent that caught in the throat. He waited, letting his eyes adjust, controlling his breathing, listening for any indication that Cain had heard him enter. Nothing. Just silence and the particular quality of emptiness that comes from spaces long abandoned. He moved through the basement, weapon up, checking corners, clearing the space with the methodical precision of 40 years' practice, found the stairs leading up, tested each step for noise before committing his weight, climbed into the church's main floor. The sanctuary was vast and empty, pews still in place but rotting, floor covered in debris and bird droppings, holes in the roof where weather had found its way in. Light filtered through broken stained glass, painting the decay in colors that had once represented biblical stories, but now just represented entropy. The bell tower stairs were at the far end, a spiral of stone that would amplify sound, that would announce anyone climbing. Cain would hear him coming, would have time to prepare, would have every advantage, unless Hawthorne did not use the stairs. The outer wall of the tower, the one facing away from the cathedral, had partially collapsed. The Gothic windows designed to let light into the stairwell now opened onto air and a 40-foot drop. But between this floor and the bell tower platform, stone protrusions offered handholds. Not good handholds, not safe handholds, but handholds nonetheless. At 20, Hawthorne would not have hesitated. At 62, with arthritic hands and a body that protested every unusual demand, he hesitated for exactly 3 seconds. Then he began to climb. He had rock climbed in his 20s, trained in mountaineering for operations in Afghanistan, but that had been 4 decades ago. Now each handhold required absolute commitment. Each foothold had to support weight that knees and ankles struggled to bear. The stone was wet from snow, slippery, unforgiving. One mistake would mean a 40-foot fall onto rubble and rebar. He climbed anyway, because his son needed him, because sometimes being a father means doing the thing you are too old to do, attempting the impossible because the alternative is unacceptable. Halfway up, his right hand slipped. For one terrible second, he hung by 3 points of contact, gravity pulling at him, the ground beckoning. His fingers, shaking from cold and age and adrenaline, scrabbled for purchase on wet stone. Found it. Held. He pressed his forehead against the wall, took 3 deep breaths, continued climbing. At the top, he pulled himself through a broken window into the bell tower platform, rolled silently, came up with his rifle, swept the space. Vincent Kane sat at the opposite window, rifle on a bipod, scope trained on the cathedral. He wore civilian clothes, dark jacket and pants, but his bearing was military, his position perfect, his focus absolute. On the floor beside him, a metal case held what looked like a remote detonator, LED display counting down. 11 minutes remaining. Kane did not turn, did not move, simply spoke into the silence, his voice carrying the weight of 58 years and too much combat. "Hello, Hawk," he said. "I was wondering when you would arrive. Took you longer than I expected. Age slowing you down, or have you gotten careful in your retirement?" Hawthorne moved his rifle to center on Kane's back. Clean shot, 5 feet. Impossible to miss even with shaking hands. "How did you know I was coming?" "Because I trained under you for 2 years. Because you taught me to always expect a counter sniper. Because you told me that the greatest threat to any operation is the man you did not account for. And because I saw the ground disturbed near the other church, saw your hide, did not know it was you specifically, but knew someone was out there. Figured if they were competent, they would eventually figure out where I was. Then you know I am going to kill you. Maybe." Kane adjusted his scope slightly, still not turning to face Hawthorne. "Or maybe we are going to talk. Because you have questions and I have time. 11 minutes before those charges detonate. 11 minutes before everyone in that cathedral dies, including your son. Seems like enough time for a conversation between old soldiers." "I am not interested in conversation." "Then shoot me. Pull the trigger. Put a bullet through my spine. But know that the instant I stop breathing, a dead man's switch activates and those charges blow anyway. So you can kill me and accomplish nothing, or you can hear me out and maybe, just maybe, find a way to save everyone." Hawthorne kept the rifle trained on Kane's back but did not fire. The mathematics of the situation were clear. If Kane had rigged a dead man's switch, killing him would trigger the same catastrophe they were trying to prevent. If he was bluffing, calling that bluff would cost lives. The only option was to listen. "Talk," Hawthorne said. Kane finally turned, moving slowly, hands visible, making no move toward the detonator. His face was older than Hawthorne remembered, lined and weathered, but his eyes still carried the same intensity that Hawthorne had seen in a 19-year-old radio operator at Quezon. "You remember Hill 881, Kane said. "You remember when you saved us all. 12 NVA gunners, perfect shots. Everyone lived because of you. Brennan said we were dying for each other. That was the only thing that mattered. Do you still believe that?" "I believe we did what we were ordered to do." "And what were we ordered to do in the Balkans? What was Shadow Protocol ordered to do when politicians needed problems solved but could not be seen solving them? We followed orders, Hawk. Every torture, every execution, every war crime. We did it because generals like Brennan told us it was necessary, told us it was for the greater good. And then when it became politically inconvenient, when journalists started asking questions, those same generals threw us away, court-martialed us, imprisoned us, executed my brother for crimes he committed under orders. Your brother tortured civilians, sold weapons to warlords, under orders, following the mission parameters. And when the mission became embarrassing, we became expendable. So now you murder innocents, kill 200 people, including children. That is your justice." Kane looked at him with something between pity and contempt. "This is not about justice. This is about sending a message that you cannot use men like us and then dispose of us. That we are not tools to be discarded. That we matter. You matter. Everyone in that cathedral matters, including my son, including Brennan's daughter, including people who have nothing to do with what happened to Shadow Protocol. They are married to the system, children of generals, friends of politicians. They are not innocent. No one is innocent." The countdown timer showed 9 minutes. Hawthorne's finger tightened on the trigger. "Give me the disarm codes." "Why would I do that?" "Because somewhere in the man you used to be, there is still the soldier who fought beside me. Still the boy who carried a radio through hell because his brothers needed him. Still someone who understands that this is wrong." Kane was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, some of the hardness falling away to reveal the damage underneath. "My brother wrote me letters from prison, 5 years of letters. He told me that every night he dreamed about the people we killed, could not sleep, could not eat, could not live with what we had done, even though we had been told it was right. The night before his execution, he wrote that he was glad to die, that death was mercy, that living with what we had become was worse than any punishment the government could devise. He was 37 years old. I am sorry for your brother, but killing innocents will not bring him back. I know, but it will make Brennan understand. Make him live with the weight of bodies the way we lived with it. Make him count the dead in his dreams the way we counted them. Hawthorne lowered his rifle slightly, not dropping aim but softening his stance. Vincent, he said, using the name instead of the rank. We are too old for this. Too broken. We have both killed enough. Let it end here. Give me the codes. Let those people walk out alive. Let your brother rest knowing you chose mercy instead of revenge. The timer showed 8 minutes. Kane looked at the detonator, then back at Hawthorne. Do you know what the worst part is, he asked. I do not even hate them anymore. Spent 10 years hating. Hating Brennan. Hating the government. Hating everyone who betrayed us. But hate is exhausting. Now I just feel empty. Just feel tired. Just want it to be over. Then let it be over. Give me the codes and walk away. Disappear. I will not stop you. Will not pursue. Just give me the codes and end this. If I give you the codes, I go to prison for the rest of my life. Military prison where they put men like me, the ones who embarrass the system. I will die in a cell, forgotten, alone. At least this way I die doing something, accomplishing something, being something other than a cautionary tale. You die murdering children. That is what you accomplish. 7 minutes, Kane reached towards the detonator. Hawthorne's finger found the trigger again, pressure building. Kane stopped, hand hovering. Here's what happens, Kane said. You can shoot me. I die. Detonator triggers. Everyone dies. Or you can let me walk out of here. I leave the codes. I disappear. You never find me. Everyone lives. But I get my freedom. You think I will just let you leave? I think you have 7 minutes to decide if revenge is worth 200 lives. I think you are a father before you are a soldier. I think you will choose your son over punishing me. The mathematics were brutal and simple. Kill Kane, potentially trigger the explosives. Let him escape. Save everyone, but let a terrorist walk free. There was no good choice. There was only the choice that lets you live with yourself afterward. If I let you walk, Hawthorne said, if I choose mercy, what guarantee do I have that you will leave the codes? You have my word, the word of a soldier to another soldier. Same word I gave you at Quezon when I said we were brothers. We are not brothers anymore. No, but we were once. That has to count for something. 6 minutes. Hawthorne made the hardest decision of his life. Harder even than the decision to center crosshairs on his son. He lowered his rifle completely, left it on the floor, stood with empty hands. Go, he said, leave the codes and go. But know this, if you are lying, if those codes do not work, I will spend the rest of my life hunting you. Will use every skill I have, every contact I have made in 50 years of service to find you. And when I find you, I will not offer mercy again. Kane smiled, sad and tired. I know, Hawk, I am counting on it. He knelt beside the detonator, entered a code into the keypad, handed Hawthorne a slip of paper with numbers written on it. The timer continued counting down, 5 minutes, 30 seconds. Those codes disable all charges, Kane said. Give them to your bomb squad. Everyone lives. You win. What about the dead man switch? Was always a bluff. Figured you would not risk calling it. Figured fear would make you negotiate. He stood, moved toward the stairs, stopped at the top, looked back. Your son is a good man, he said. Better than we were at his age. Better than we ever could be. Train him well. Teach him to be something other than what we became. Then he descended the spiral stairs, footsteps echoing, fading into distance. Hawthorne grabbed this paper with the codes, grabbed his radio, transmitted to Brennan. I have the disarm codes. Sending them now. Get your bomb squad to work immediately. 5 minutes until detonation. He read the series of numbers, each one a barrier between life and death. Heard Brennan relay them to the bomb squad, heard the controlled chaos of men racing against a clock. Heard the cathedral beginning an evacuation that was trying very hard not to look like an evacuation. What about Kane? Brennan asked. Gone, Hawthorne said. Made a call, chose lives over justice. You can court-martial me later. He descended from the bell tower, every step taking him closer to the cathedral, closer to his son. Outside, in the falling snow, he saw people beginning to emerge from the building. security personnel shepherding them calmly, trying to maintain order. Sarah Brennan came out still in her wedding dress, looking confused and frightened. Thomas was beside her, protecting her even as he scanned for threats. The bomb squad worked inside, 4 technicians moving through the building with equipment in careful hands, entering codes, disabling charges. The timer hit 2 minutes. Hawthorne was at the cathedral doors, pushing through crowds, trying to reach Thomas. The timer hit 1 minute. He saw Thomas see him, saw his son's face register surprise that his father was here, was running toward him, was closing distance. 30 seconds. They met in the center of the evacuated crowd. Father and son, neither speaking, both understanding that words would have to wait. 15 seconds. A bomb technician ran from the cathedral, gave thumbs up, all charges disarmed, building clear. 0. Nothing happened. No explosion, no death, just silence and falling snow, and 200 people who would go home tonight, who would sleep in their beds, who would never know how close they had come to ending. Thomas spoke first. "You came," he said. "Did not think you would." "You are my son," Hawthorne replied. "Where else would I be?" They stood there, the distance between them reduced to 3 feet, but feeling like miles. Everything unsaid, everything broken. But for the first time in years, both of them present in the same moment, breathing the same air, alive to try again. Sarah approached, took Thomas's hand. "Is the wedding off?" she asked. Thomas looked at Hawthorne, then at Brennan, who had emerged from the cathedral. "Unless the father of the groom objects." Hawthorne shook his head. "I will be there, front row, where I should have been all along." But the wedding would have to wait. First came the debriefings, the investigations, the careful documentation of a crisis averted. First came the reckoning with what had almost happened and what it said about all of them. First came the understanding that Vincent Kane was in the wind, that Shadow Protocol was damaged but not destroyed, that this was not an ending, but an interruption. And as Hawthorne stood in the snow, watching his son hold the woman he loved, he understood that redemption was not a single moment. It was a process, a choice made again and again, a commitment to be better than you were, to repair what you had broken, to reach across distance and damage and try to touch the people you should have held all along. The cathedral bells began to ring despite everything, and the sound carried across the Montana Valley, a declaration that faith persists, that hope survives, that sometimes mercy wins even when justice fails. Hawthorne listened to those bells and felt something shift inside him, some weight beginning to ease after 50 years of carrying it. His son was alive. That was what mattered. Everything else was noise. The debriefing room at Fort Harrison smelled of stale coffee and institutional disinfectant, the particular scent of military spaces where bad news gets delivered and worse decisions get made. Hawthorne sat at a gray metal table that had witnessed 1,000 interrogations, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee gone cold 2 hours ago. Across from him, a woman in a dark suit studied documents with the focused intensity of someone trained to find lies in official reports. Her badge identified her as Deputy Director Elizabeth Carver, CIA, and her eyes carried the weight of someone who had made a career out of secrets. Thomas sat beside Hawthorne, still wearing his dress uniform, though the wedding had been postponed indefinitely. The relationship between father and son remained fragile, a truce more than a reconciliation, but they were at least occupying the same space without one of them leaving. That counted as progress measured against 3 years of silence. General Brennan stood near the window, looking out at the Montana darkness. The wedding had been scheduled for 2 in the afternoon. Now it was past midnight, and they were still trying to understand what had happened and what it meant for what came next. Carver closed her folder with the decisive snap of someone reaching a conclusion. "Let me make sure I understand the sequence of events," she said. "Colonel Hawthorne, you were in position as Overwatch. You observed what you believed to be Thomas receiving a detonator from Vincent Kane. You reported this to General Brennan. General Brennan then informed you that Thomas was actually undercover Army intelligence. You subsequently left your position, infiltrated the abandoned church, confronted Kane in the bell tower, and allowed him to escape in exchange for disarm codes. Does that cover it?" "That covers it," Hawthorne said. "And at no point during this operation did you consider that allowing a known terrorist to escape might constitute a serious breach of protocol?" "I considered that 200 lives outweighed protocol. Carver leaned back in her chair, the kind of movement that senior intelligence officers make when they are about to say something unpleasant. Colonel, I have been doing this work for 30 years. I have run operations on 5 continents. I have made the hard calls that keep this country safe. And I can tell you with absolute certainty that what you did was catastrophically wrong. Vincent Kane is not some foot soldier. He is a trained intelligence operative with connections throughout the former Shadow Protocol network. By letting him walk, you have guaranteed that he will reconstitute that network. Guaranteed that more attacks will follow. Guaranteed that the people you saved today will be targets tomorrow. The words landed with the force of truth. Hawthorne had known, even in the moment of letting Kane leave, that he was making a choice with consequences that extended far beyond the immediate crisis. But knowing and accepting were different things. What would you have done, he asked, knowing you had 7 minutes to decide, knowing that shooting him might trigger the explosives? What call would you have made? I would have shot him, Carver said without hesitation. Would have accepted the risk. Would have understood that sometimes saving lives tomorrow requires sacrificing lives today. That is what leadership means, Colonel. Making the choices that let you sleep at night, even when they keep everyone else awake. Thomas spoke for the first time since the debriefing began. With respect, ma'am, my father made the right call. Kane's dead man switch might have been real. We had no way to verify. Shooting him would have been a gamble with 200 lives as the stakes. A gamble we should have taken, Carver replied, because now Kane is in the wind. Now Shadow Protocol knows we are on to them. Now whatever larger operation they are planning has been accelerated because they know their timeline is compromised. What larger operation? Brennan asked from his position by the window. Carver pulled another folder from her briefcase, spread photographs across the table. The images showed military installations, government buildings, civilian infrastructure. Each photo had been marked with red circles, highlighting what Hawthorne recognized as security vulnerabilities. For the past 6 months, she said, CIA has been tracking increased chatter from former Shadow Protocol operatives, encrypted communications, financial transactions, weapons purchases, all pointing to something big, something coordinated. The cathedral attack was never the main event. It was a test, a proof of concept. They wanted to see if they could penetrate high-level security, plant explosives, and potentially eliminate a 4-star general along with his entire family. The fact that they almost succeeded means they are ready for the next phase. Which is what exactly? Thomas asked. We do not know, Carver admitted. That is what your undercover operation was supposed to determine. But now that Kane knows you are compromised, now that he knows we are watching, he is going to accelerate whatever timeline he had, which means we have limited time to stop something we do not fully understand. She turned her attention back to Hawthorne. Which brings us to you, Colonel. You have a unique relationship with Kane. You trained him. You served with him. You let him go when you could have killed him. That makes you either an asset or a liability depending on how we play this. I am retired, Hawthorne said. Have been for 5 years. I came here to protect my son. That job is done. Is it? Carver pulled out one more photograph. This one showed Hawthorne himself, taken from a distance with a telephoto lens. He was on his ranch in Montana, walking from his house to his barn, completely unaware he was being surveilled. The photo was dated 3 days ago. Shadow Protocol has been watching you, she said, has been watching your son, has been watching General Brennan and his daughter. They know all of you now, know where you live, where you work, where you are vulnerable. So no, Colonel, your job is not done. Your job has just started. The implications settled over the room like fallout. Hawthorne had thought he was protecting his son from a single threat. He had not considered that by engaging, by revealing himself, he had painted a target on everyone connected to him. What do you want from me? He asked. I want you to help us find Kane, Carver said. Want you to use your connection to him. The fact that you showed him mercy, that you let him walk, that means something to men like him. Men who have been betrayed by everyone else. You offered him something no one else has. That gives you leverage. You want me to be bait. I want you to be a bridge, a way back inside Shadow Protocol. You have credibility that no other operator could manufacture. You are the legendary sniper who trained most of them, the man who survived 50 years of combat, the father who almost shot his own son but chose trust instead. They will respect that. They will believe that maybe, just maybe, You are someone who understands them. Hawthorne looked at Thomas. His son's face showed conflicting emotions. Pride that his father was being asked to serve. Fear for what that service might cost. Hope that they might actually be working together instead of existing in parallel silences. If I do this, Hawthorne said, if I agree to help, I have conditions. Name them. My son gets pulled from undercover work. His cover is blown. Kane knows who he is. Sending him back in gets him killed. Agreed, Carver said. Thomas will be reassigned to a training role. He has earned it. And when this is over, when Shadow Protocol is finished, I am done. No more missions. No more calls in the middle of the night. No more choosing between duty and family. If we finish Shadow Protocol, if we dismantle this network completely, then yes, you are done. You have my word. The word of a CIA officer, Brennan said from the window, his tone carrying skepticism that decades of dealing with intelligence agencies had earned. Forgive me, Elizabeth, but that word has a complicated history. Carver smiled, though the expression carried no warmth. True, General, but unlike some, I keep my promises. Ask anyone who has worked with me. I deliver on my commitments, even when those commitments are unpleasant. She stood, gathering her folders. Get some rest. All of you. Tomorrow we begin planning. Colonel Hawthorne, you and I need to have a longer conversation about Vincent Kane, about what you know, what you suspect, where he might run. Thomas, I need a full debrief on every interaction you had with Shadow Protocol during your 18 months undercover. General, I need you to compile a list of everyone who might be a target, everyone connected to the original investigation that brought down the unit. And Sarah, Thomas asked, what about her? She is supposed to be getting married. Supposed to be starting a life. How do we tell her that has to wait because we are hunting terrorists? We do not tell her anything, Carver said. As far as she knows, the wedding was postponed due to a security threat that has been neutralized. Let her believe she is safe. Let her plan a new date. Normalcy is important. It keeps people from asking questions. She is owed the truth, Thomas insisted. The truth is a luxury we cannot afford right now, Carver replied. The truth is that her fiancé spent 18 months pretending to be something he was not, that her father-in-law almost killed her future husband, that her wedding was interrupted by a terrorist plot that is part of a larger conspiracy we barely understand. You think she deserves that truth? You think that knowledge makes her life better? Thomas had no answer for that. Neither did Hawthorne. The weight of secrets was familiar to both of them. The burden of knowing things that other people should never have to know. Carver left, taking her folders and her certainty with her. The three men remained in the debriefing room, each processing what had been said and what it meant. Brennan spoke first. I do not trust her. Why not? Thomas asked. Because she is too smooth, Brennan said. Too prepared. Too certain. I have been in military intelligence for 40 years. The people who are that confident are usually the ones with the most to hide. You think she is involved? Hawthorne asked. Think she is part of Shadow Protocol? I think she knows more than she is telling us. Think this whole thing is more complicated than she wants us to believe. But I do not have proof, just instinct. And instinct has kept me alive longer than protocol ever did. They left the fort together, walked out into Montana cold that felt cleaner than the recycled air of the debriefing room. The snow had stopped, but the ground was white, pristine, unmarked by footprints. The world looked innocent in a way that felt like mockery. Thomas stopped beside his rental car, keys in hand, not yet ready to drive away. We should talk, he said to Hawthorne. Actually talk. Not just exist in the same room, but talk about what has happened. About the last 3 years. About what comes next. Hawthorne wanted to deflect, to return to the safe distance they had maintained for so long. But he had spent 48 hours buried in frozen earth thinking about all the things he should have said and never did. If he walked away now, if he chose silence again, he would prove that nothing had changed. Come to the ranch, he said. Tomorrow, we can talk there, away from all this. Thomas nodded. Okay, tomorrow. He drove away, taillights disappearing into darkness. Hawthorne stood alone in the parking lot, watching his son leave and feeling the weight of years pressing down. But this time the weight felt different. Not lighter exactly, but more like something he might eventually be able to set down. Brennan approached, placed a hand on his shoulder. You did good today, Hawk. Saved my daughter. Saved a lot of people. Whatever else happens, remember that. I let Kane go. Let a terrorist escape. Carver is right about that. You made the call you could live with. That matters more than tactics, more than strategy. We have spent our whole lives following orders that made sense in the moment but haunted us later. You chose differently, chose mercy. I am proud of you for that. They stood together, two old soldiers who had survived too much and seen too much and carried too much. Brothers by combat, if not by blood. Watch your back, Brennan said. Something about this whole situation does not sit right. Kane giving up too easily. Carver appearing too quickly. The timing of everything. Just watch your back. Always do, Hawthorne replied. The ranch house was exactly as he had left it 3 days ago, but it felt different. The silence felt less like peace and more like absence. The rooms Mary had filled with life still held her furniture, her decorations, the small touches that made a house into a home. But she was gone and the house knew it. Hawthorne moved through the familiar spaces, checking windows and doors out of habit, the routine of a man who had lived in hostile territory long enough that security became reflexive. He made coffee, though it was 2 in the morning, stood in the kitchen drinking it while looking at the photographs on the wall. His phone rang. The screen showed a number he did not recognize, area code he could not place. He almost declined the call, almost let it go to voicemail, but instinct made him answer. Hello? The voice that came through was one he had heard just hours ago, one that should not be calling him, one that changed everything. Hawk, Vincent Kane said, hope I am not interrupting your sleep, though I suspect neither of us sleeps much these days. How did you get this number? I have resources. Same resources that let me watch you for the past 3 days. Same resources that photographed you on your ranch. You looked peaceful there. Almost human, almost like the boy I met before the war broke us. What do you want, Vincent? Want to thank you for letting me walk, for choosing mercy. Not many men would have made that choice. Certainly not the men we became. That act of grace that deserves acknowledgement. If this is about gratitude, consider it acknowledged. Now disappear like you said you would. I did disappear. Currently 500 miles away in a location you will never find. But I am calling because you deserve to know something. Something that CIA deputy director did not tell you in that debriefing room. Hawthorne set down his coffee cup. Talk. Shadow protocol is not what you think it is, Kane said. Not what Brennan thinks. Not what the official reports say. Yes, we were a black ops unit. Yes, we did terrible things. But we did them under orders. Direct orders from someone high up in the intelligence community. Someone who used us for operations that could never be acknowledged. And when we became inconvenient, when journalists started asking questions, that same someone orchestrated our exposure and destruction. You are saying you were set up. I am saying we were tools, used and discarded, and the person who used us is still out there, still in power, still running operations that make what we did look tame. Who? That is the question, is it not? That is what Thomas was actually investigating during his 18 months undercover. Not the remnants of Shadow Protocol. The person who created Shadow Protocol in the first place. The person who wants us all dead before we can talk. Hawthorne felt the pieces beginning to shift, the picture reforming into something darker and more complex than he had been told. If what you are saying is true, why blow up a cathedral? Why risk killing 200 people? We were not going to blow up the cathedral, Kane said. The explosives were training charges, low yield, designed to damage the building but not kill anyone. The whole thing was theater, a way to draw out the real players, a way to see who responded and how they responded. And guess who showed up first? Before FBI, before Homeland Security, before anyone else. Your friend Deputy Director Carver. That does not prove anything. She is CIA. Of course she responded to a terrorist threat. She responded within 90 minutes of the threat being detected, had files prepared, had a whole operation ready to go, like she knew it was coming, like she had been waiting for it. Hawthorne's mind raced through the implications. You are saying Carver is the one who ran Shadow Protocol, the one who set you up. I am saying she is part of something bigger, something that makes Shadow Protocol look like a single operation in a much larger war. And I am saying that by letting me go, by showing mercy, you have put yourself in her crosshairs. She cannot allow loose ends, cannot allow people who might question the official story. Why tell me this? What do you gain? Maybe I am tired of being used. Maybe I saw something in you today that reminded me of who we used to be. Maybe I want one person to know the truth before we are all dead. Take your pick. If I believe you, if any of this is true, what am I supposed to do about it? Survive, Kane said. Keep your son close. Trust no one. And when Carver asks you to do something that feels wrong, remember this conversation. Remember that the real enemy might be wearing a badge and sitting across from you at a briefing table. The line went dead. Hawthorne stood in his kitchen, holding a phone that had just delivered information he could not verify and could not ignore. Either Kane was telling the truth and the entire situation was compromised, or this was a psychological operation designed to sow distrust and paranoia. Both options were equally plausible. Both options meant danger. He called Brennan. The general answered on the second ring, voice alert despite the hour. "Talk to me, Hawk. Just got a call from Kane. He told me things. Things we need to discuss in person. How secure is this line? Assume nothing is secure. Then come to my house. Now, we need to talk before anyone else gets involved." Hawthorne drove through empty Montana highways, headlights cutting through darkness that felt alive with threat. Every car behind him might be surveillance. Every shadow might hide danger. Kane's words had infected him with the particular paranoia that comes from knowing too much and understanding too little. Brennan's house sat on the outskirts of Great Falls, a modest ranch home that looked like it belonged to a retired school teacher, rather than a four-star general. Security was discreet but thorough, cameras and sensors hidden behind landscaping, reinforced doors disguised as standard construction. Brennan opened the door before Hawthorne could knock. Inside, Sarah sat at the kitchen table in a bathrobe, drinking tea, looking exhausted but determined. She stood when Hawthorne entered, crossed to him, hugged him with surprising strength. "Thank you," she said. "Thomas told me what you did, how you were there, how you protected us. Thank you for giving me my fiancé back." Hawthorne had no idea how to respond to gratitude for almost killing her future husband. He settled for a nod, extracting himself from the embrace as gently as possible. "Sarah," Brennan said, "you should get some rest. We need to talk privately." She shook her head. "Whatever this is, whatever's happening, I deserve to know. I am not a child. I am a grown woman whose wedding was interrupted by terrorists. I think I have earned the right to understand what is really going on." Brennan looked at Hawthorne, silent question in his eyes. Hawthorne understood the dilemma. Protecting Sarah meant keeping her ignorant, but keeping her ignorant might mean she could not protect herself. "Let her stay," Hawthorne said. "If Kane is right, if this is bigger than we thought, she needs to know what she is facing." They sat at the table, three people bound by circumstance and danger. And Hawthorne repeated everything Kane had told him, every accusation, every implication, every reason to doubt the official story they had been given. When he finished, Sarah spoke first. "You believe him?" "I believe he believes what he is saying. Whether it is true is another question." "Dad," Sarah said, turning to Brennan, is it possible that Carver is dirty? That this whole thing is more complicated than we were told?" Brennan was quiet for a long moment, the kind of silence that comes before admissions that change everything. "I have been suspicious of Carver for years," he said finally. "She rose too fast in CIA, had access to operations that should have been compartmentalized, was always present at the moments when things went wrong. I flagged her multiple times to internal affairs. Nothing ever came of it. She is protected. The question is by whom?" "Then what do we do?" Hawthorne asked. "We investigate," Brennan said, quietly, without telling anyone. "We look at Carver's history, her operations, her connections. We find evidence. And if we find it, if we prove she is dirty, we bring her down. And if we are wrong, if Kane is lying and Carver is clean, then we have wasted time and looked like paranoid old men. But I would rather be wrong and alive than right and dead." Sarah stood, moved to a desk in the corner, opened a laptop. "If we are doing this, we need to be smart about it. Everything documented, everything backed up to secure locations. We need insurance." "You should not be involved in this," Brennan said. "This is dangerous." "Which is exactly why I need to be involved," Sarah replied. "Thomas is undercover. You are being targeted. Colonel Hawthorne is being used as bait. Everyone I love is in danger. So either you let me help or I go to Carver myself and ask her directly what is going on." The threat was real. Sarah had her father's stubbornness combined with her mother's intelligence. She would do exactly what she said. "Fine," Brennan conceded, "but you stay behind the scenes, research only, no field work, no contact with anyone we are investigating." "Agreed," Sarah said, already typing. "Give me everything you know about Carver, every operation, every connection, every anomaly. I will find the pattern." They worked through the rest of the night, building a case from fragments and suspicions. Sarah compiled records that Brennan had kept, documents that should have been destroyed, but that he had preserved in violation of protocol because some part of him had known they would be needed. Hawthorne contributed his own observations, the small details from the cathedral operation that had felt wrong at the time but that he had dismissed. By dawn, they had a picture, incomplete, circumstantial, but compelling. Carver had been present at or involved in every major shadow protocol operation, had authorized actions that later became war crimes, had been part of the investigation that exposed the unit but had somehow emerged untouched while everyone else burned. The pattern was clear to anyone willing to see it. She was not just protecting Shadow Protocol, Sarah said, staring at the screen. She was running it, using it for operations CIA could not officially conduct. And when it got exposed, she sacrificed the operators to protect herself. Then why target the cathedral? Hawthorne asked. Why risk exposure now? Because Thomas was getting close, Brennan said. His undercover work was succeeding. He was gathering evidence. She needed to disrupt his operation, scatter Shadow Protocol, create chaos that would let her contain the investigation. But she did not count on you, Sarah said to Hawthorne. Did not expect a retired sniper to insert himself into the situation. Did not plan for mercy being shown. Her operation failed because you changed the variables. Which means I am now a problem she has to solve, Hawthorne said. The realization settled heavy. He had thought he was protecting his son. Instead, he had painted a target on all of them. His phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number. He opened it, felt his blood run cold. The message contained a single photograph. Rachel Morgan. The protege he had trained, the woman who had died 2 years ago in what was ruled a training accident. But the photo was not from 2 years ago. It was recent. Rachel standing in an airport, very much alive, looking directly at the camera. Below the photo, a single line of text. Some debts never die. Some ghosts refuse to stay buried. Time to collect, Hawk. Hawthorne showed the phone to Brennan and Sarah. They stared at the image, processing the impossible. Rachel's alive, Sarah whispered, which means everything we think we know is wrong, Brennan said. The morning light came through the windows, cold and gray. Somewhere out there, Vincent Kane was running. Rachel Morgan was alive and apparently involved in something none of them understood. Deputy Director Carver was either a criminal mastermind or a scapegoat. Thomas was pulled from undercover work and vulnerable. And Hawthorne, who had come to Montana just to attend a wedding, was now at the center of a conspiracy that reached higher and deeper than anything he had imagined. The phone buzzed again. Another message from the same unknown number. This one was longer. Meet me. Alone. Tomorrow night. Coordinates attached. Come armed, but come ready to listen. Rachel has things to tell you. Things about Shadow Protocol. Things about who really killed her husband. Things about what is really happening. Do not bring backup. Do not tell Carver. Trust no one, especially not the people telling you to trust them. The message included GPS coordinates for a location in the mountains north of Great Falls. Remote, isolated, the perfect place for an ambush or a revelation. It is a trap, Brennan said. Probably, Hawthorne agreed. You are not seriously considering going. I am absolutely considering it. If Rachel is alive, I need to know why. Need to know what she knows. Need to understand what we are really facing. Then I am coming with you. No, if this goes wrong, Thomas needs you. Sarah needs you. I am expendable. You are not. You are not expendable, Sarah said quietly. Not to Thomas. Not anymore. The words hit harder than they should have. For so long, Hawthorne had defined himself by his utility, by his skills, by the missions he could accomplish. The idea that his value might come from relationship rather than function was foreign and uncomfortable and necessary. I have to go, he said. Have to know the truth, but I will take precautions. We'll have backup at a distance. We'll be careful. Brennan nodded slowly, understanding the futility of argument. We document everything, he said. Everything we know goes into sealed files. Multiple copies, multiple locations. If something happens to any of us, the truth gets out. They spent the morning preparing for contingencies, writing down everything they suspected, everything they had learned, everything that might matter if they did not survive whatever was coming. It was the work of soldiers who had been betrayed too many times to trust that the system would protect them. By afternoon, Hawthorne was back at his ranch, packing gear for the meeting. Rifle, ammunition, medical supplies, body armor. The tools of his trade accumulated over 50 years. He worked with the methodical precision of repetition, checking each item twice, ensuring nothing was forgotten. Thomas arrived as the sun was setting, knocked once, then entered without waiting for answer. That was new, that casual assumption of welcome. Or maybe it was old, something from childhood that had been buried under years of distance, but never completely destroyed. Heard you are planning something stupid, Thomas said. Heard you have opinions about my plans, Hawthorne replied. They faced each other across the kitchen table, father and son, still figuring out how to occupy the same space. Rachel is alive, Thomas said. That changes everything. She was investigating shadow protocol when she supposedly died. If she is alive, if she has information, we need it, which is why I am going. Then I am coming with you. No, Dad, I am not 12 anymore. I am a ranger. I have combat experience. I can handle myself. And if this goes bad, you need someone watching your back. The word dad hung in the air between them, fragile and weighted. Thomas had not called him that in years, had not used the term that implied relationship and expectation in something like love. Hawthorne wanted to argue, to insist that a father's job is protecting his son, even when that son is a trained soldier. But he was also beginning to understand that protection sometimes means allowing people to face danger, allowing them to prove themselves, allowing them to be partners rather than children. All right, he said, but we do this my way, my rules, and if it goes wrong, if this is a trap, you do not try to save me. You run, you survive. You make sure someone knows what happened. That is the deal. Thomas nodded. That is the deal. They spent the evening preparing together, cleaning weapons, checking equipment, planning approaches and fallback positions. The work was familiar to both of them, routine made sacred by repetition. They did not talk much, but the silence felt different than it had before. Felt like the silence of people who understand each other rather than people who have nothing to say. As midnight approached, as they loaded gear into Hawthorne's truck, Thomas spoke quietly. I know why you let Kane go. Know what you were protecting. Thank you for that. For choosing me over the mission. Never had that before. It was the right call, Hawthorne said. Or the wrong call, or both. Hard to tell anymore. Either way, I am glad you made it. Glad you are here. Glad we get another chance to figure this out. They drove north into mountains that held snow even in summer, territory that belonged more to wilderness than civilization. The GPS coordinates led them to an abandoned fire lookout tower, 40 years old, wooden platform 60 feet above the forest floor. The kind of place where you could see someone coming from miles away. The kind of place where one person with a rifle controlled the entire area. They parked a mile away, approached on foot, moving with tactical discipline through terrain that tried to kill them with every step. Hawthorne's knees protested, his back ached. His 62-year-old body reminded him that he was attempting things better suited to younger men. But Thomas was beside him, matching his pace, offering a hand over difficult sections without making it seem like charity. The tower rose ahead, silhouette against stars. A single light burned in the observation room at the top. Someone was waiting. They split up, standard overwatch procedure. Thomas moved to a position 300 meters out, set up with a rifle that would give him clear sight lines to the tower. Hawthorne continued alone, climbing the wooden stairs that creaked with every step, announcing his presence to anyone listening. At the top, the door stood open. Light spilled out. Hawthorne entered with weapon ready, scanning corners, checking for threats. Rachel Morgan sat at a small table, exactly as he remembered her from 2 years ago. Same face, same bearing, same eyes that had seen too much combat and carried too much knowledge. She held a cup of coffee in both hands, steam rising in the cold air. Hello, Hawk, she said. Been a long time. Sorry about the dramatic death, but I needed to disappear, needed to be dead so I could do the work that needed doing. Hawthorne lowered his weapon but did not holster it. You have 30 seconds to convince me not to arrest you. Starting now. Rachel smiled, sad and tired, still the same, still all business, still thinking in terms of seconds and margins and perfect shots. Sit down, Hawk, we need to talk. And what I have to tell you is going to take longer than 30 seconds. Going to take long enough that you will wish you had never asked. Hawthorne remained standing. Talk. My husband did not die in a Russian ambush, Rachel said. He was murdered by Shadow Protocol on orders from Deputy Director Elizabeth Carver because he discovered what she was really running, what Shadow Protocol was really for. Which was what? A private army, off the books, funded by black budget money that nobody tracks, used for operations that CIA could not officially conduct. Assassinations, coups, economic warfare, everything that makes the world work the way powerful people want it to work. Daniel stumbled onto financial records, transfers that did not make sense, money flowing from CIA accounts to offshore holdings. He started investigating, started asking questions, and that got him killed. Why fake your own death? Because they were coming for me next. Carver knew Daniel had talked to me, knew he had shared what he found, so she staged a training accident, made it look like I fell through ice. But I saw it coming, had time to prepare, switched bodies with a Jane Doe from the morgue, let them think I was dead while I went underground. For 2 years, Hawthorne said. For 2 years, you let everyone who cared about you believe you were dead. Let me believe I had lost another person I trained. Let Thomas grieve. Let all of us carry that weight. I am sorry, Rachel said, and her voice broke slightly. Truly sorry, but I needed time, needed to gather evidence, needed to build a case that could not be ignored or covered up, and I needed to stay alive long enough to deliver it. What evidence? She pulled a laptop from a bag beside her chair, opened it, turned the screen so Hawthorne could see. Files, hundreds of them. Financial records, operation logs, communications between Carver and Shadow Protocol operatives. Everything documenting 10 years of illegal activity. Everything proving that Carver had used Shadow Protocol as her personal death squad. How did you get this? Carefully, Rachel said, slowly, one piece at a time over 2 years, breaking into secure servers, bribing low-level clerks, following money trails, living like a ghost so good at being invisible that even the people looking for me could not find me. And now I have enough. Now I can prove what Carver did, can bring down her entire operation. But I need help, need someone with credibility, someone who cannot be dismissed as a conspiracy theorist or a disgruntled operative. I need you, Hawk. Need you to take this evidence to people who can act on it. Inspector General, congressional oversight, someone clean. Why not take it yourself? Because I am officially dead. I have no standing, no authority. The moment I reveal myself, Carver will have me arrested or killed before I can testify. But you are a decorated veteran, retired colonel, someone with 50 years of honorable service. If you bring this forward, people will listen. Or I will be dismissed as a senile old man manipulated by a dead woman's ghost. Maybe, Rachel admitted, but it is the best chance we have. The only chance. Hawthorne studied the laptop screen, scrolling through files that represented years of criminal activity. If this was real, if it could be verified, it would destroy Carver and everyone connected to her operation. But it would also expose the rot at the heart of American intelligence, would prove that the very institutions meant to protect the country had been corrupted, would shatter whatever faith remained in the system. This goes public, he said. This destroys more than just Carver. This destroys trust, makes every operation questionable, gives enemies ammunition. I know, Rachel said. Believe me, I have thought about that for 2 years. Thought about whether the truth is worth the cost. But Daniel died because he believed people deserve to know what is being done in their name. I owe it to him to finish what he started. A sound outside. Faint. Almost nothing. But Hawthorne had been listening for threats for 50 years. He recognized the particular quality of silence that comes when someone is trying very hard not to make noise. We are not alone, he said quietly. Rachel's hand moved to a weapon on her belt. I know, I have been tracking 3 heat signatures approaching from the south for the past 5 minutes. Not your son, different angle, professional spacing. Shadow Protocol or Carver's cleanup crew? Hard to tell the difference anymore. They moved simultaneously, killing the light, taking positions that gave them sight lines to the stairs and windows. Years of training made them move as one unit despite 2 years of separation. Thomas's voice came through the radio. I have visual on 3 hostiles, 200 meters out, moving tactical, armed, permission to engage? Negative, Hawthorne transmitted. Hold position. Let them commit. We need to know if they are here to kill or capture. The stairs creaked. Someone climbing. Trying to be quiet, but the old wood betrayed every footfall. Hawthorne aimed at the doorway, finger on trigger, breathing controlled. Beside him, Rachel did the same. A figure appeared. Male, 50-something, wearing tactical gear but no insignia. He stepped into the room, weapon raised, scanning for targets. Behind him, two more, all moving with the fluid competence of professional operators. The first man's eyes found Hawthorne in the darkness, registered recognition, hesitated. That half-second of hesitation was all Hawthorne needed to understand. These were not kill team. They were verification team, sent to confirm Rachel was here and report back. "Lower your weapons," Hawthorne said. "Do it slowly, hands where I can see them." The three men complied, professional, disciplined, waiting to see how this would resolve. "Who sent you?" Rachel asked. The first man spoke. "Deputy Director Carver. She knows you are alive, knows you are meeting with Hawthorne. Sent us to verify and observe, not to engage. Observe and report back so she can send the real team," Rachel said. "Standard protocol, you are just reconnaissance." "We follow orders," the man replied. "Same as you used to, same as all of us." "And if I told you those orders came from someone who has been using you for her own gain? If I told you that Carver has been running illegal operations for a decade, would you still follow orders?" The three men exchanged glances, uncertainty rippling through their professional calm. "We are soldiers," the first man said. "We follow the chain of command." "Even when the chain of command is corrupt?" Hawthorne asked. "Even when following orders means being complicit in murder?" "With respect, Colonel, we do not have the luxury of questioning orders. We do the work. We complete the mission. We trust that people above us are making the right calls." "That trust is what they count on," Rachel said. "That is how good men become tools for bad people." She moved to the laptop, turned it so the three operatives could see the screen. "Here is the evidence. Here is what Carver has been doing. Take 10 minutes. Read it. Then decide if you still want to follow her orders." The three men moved closer, reading. Hawthorne watched their faces change as they processed what they were seeing. Recognition, anger, betrayal, the particular expression of people realizing they have been used. After 5 minutes, the first man stepped back from the laptop. "This is real?" "Every document verified," Rachel said. "Every transaction traced. Every operation documented. Your boss is a criminal, and everyone who works for her is an accessory." The man looked at his two companions, silent communication passing between them. Then back to Hawthorne. "What do you want from us?" "Walk away," Hawthorne said. "Forget you found us. Tell Carver you searched, but we were already gone. Buy us 24 hours to get this evidence to people who can act on it. And if we refuse, if we do our jobs and report back, then Rachel and I disappear again. You waste resources hunting ghosts. And Carver stays in power. Keeps using people like you. Keeps destroying anyone who gets in her way. Your choice. Follow orders or follow your conscience." The three men conferred quietly. Hawthorne could not hear what they were saying, but he could read their body language. These were men who had believed they were serving their country. Now they were discovering they had been serving one person's ambition. That revelation was breaking something inside them. The first man turned back. 24 hours. After that, we do not know anything. We tried, but you were too good. That is our story. Thank you, Hawthorne said. Do not thank us, the man replied. We are not heroes. We are just tired of being lied to. Tired of wondering if the things we did were justified or if we were just tools for someone's agenda. He and his team left, descending the stairs, disappearing into darkness. Hawthorne waited until he could no longer hear their footsteps before keying his radio. "Thomas, 3 hostiles just left the area. Track them. Make sure they actually leave. Make sure they do not double back or call in backup." "Copy that," Thomas transmitted. "But we need to move. If Carver knows where we are, she will send more." Rachel was already packing the laptop, gathering equipment. "He is right. We have maybe an hour before the real team arrives. The ones who do not ask questions." "Where do we go?" Hawthorne asked. "Brennan's house," Rachel said. "We gather everyone. We make copies of everything. Then we split up, multiple people carrying multiple copies of the evidence to multiple destinations. Old school intelligence work. Make ourselves too distributed to eliminate." They climbed down from the tower, moved through forest toward where Thomas waited. The night was cold and clear, stars overhead indifferent to human concerns. Hawthorne felt his age in every step, felt the weight of 62 years and 342 kills and all the choices that had led him to this moment. But he also felt something else. Purpose. Not the hollow purpose of following orders, but the genuine purpose of doing what was right, even when doing what was right was dangerous and costly and likely to end badly. Thomas met them at the rally point, weapon ready, eyes scanning for threats. He saw Rachel and froze. His training kept him from lowering his guard, but his face showed the shock of seeing someone he thought was dead. "Captain Morgan," he said, "they told us you were killed." "Reports of my death," Rachel replied with a tired smile. They moved together through the darkness. Three soldiers who had all been damaged by the same system, all trying to repair what they could before it was too late. Hawthorne led the way, using skills honed over 50 years to navigate terrain and avoid detection. Behind him, Thomas and Rachel moved with the competence of their generation. Different techniques, but same foundation. At the truck, they piled in. Hawthorne drove. Thomas rode shotgun. Rachel sat behind with the laptop containing the evidence that could bring down Carver or get them all killed trying. The drive back to Great Falls took 2 hours. They did not speak much, each processing what came next, each understanding that by choosing this path, they had made themselves enemies of powerful people, each accepting that some fights were worth having even when you could not win. Brennan's house appeared ahead, lights on despite the hour. Sarah's car sat in the driveway. They were all about to be brought into this, all about to become targets, all about to discover that doing the right thing was often the most dangerous choice of all. Hawthorne parked, killed the engine, sat for a moment in silence. Then he opened the door and stepped out into cold Montana air that smelled like snow and pine and the particular scent of decisions that could not be unmade. Time to finish what Rachel's husband started. Time to prove that some truths were worth dying for. Time to discover whether 3 generations of soldiers could do what institutions had failed to do and hold power accountable. Brennan's living room had transformed into a command center. Laptops covered the coffee table. Printed documents spread across the floor in careful stacks organized by date and operation. Sarah worked 3 computers simultaneously, copying files, encrypting data, creating redundant backups that would survive even if the originals were destroyed. Rachel sat beside her, directing the process, pointing out which documents were most critical, which evidence would be impossible for Carver to explain away. Hawthorne stood at the window watching the street, rifle propped against the wall within reach. Thomas had taken position on the roof, overwatch, the same role his father had performed at the cathedral 3 days ago. The symmetry was not lost on either of them. They were learning to protect each other, learning to function as a team rather than as 2 damaged men occupying parallel lives. Brennan paced, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in the careful language of someone who knows every word might be monitored. He was calling in favors accumulated over 40 years of service, activating a network of people who owed him loyalty or money or their lives. Not everyone answered. Some calls went to voicemail. Some numbers had been disconnected. The machinery of institutional power was already working to isolate them, to cut off support before they could mount an effective defense. "We have a problem," Sarah said, staring at her screen. "Someone is trying to access our network remotely. Professional attack. Military-grade cyber warfare. They are looking for the evidence files." "Can they get in?" Rachel asked. "Not yet," Sarah replied. "But they are good, really good. I can hold them off for maybe 2 hours. After that, they will find a way through." "Then we have 2 hours," Hawthorne said from his position by the window. 2 hours to copy everything, get it to multiple locations, make it impossible for them to contain. Brennan ended his call, crossed to the table. "I have 3 people who can help. Senator Mitchell, he has oversight authority on intelligence operations. Colonel Hayes at Inspector General, he is clean. And Judge Thornton, federal court, she has the authority to issue warrants and protection orders. We get the evidence to all 3 simultaneously. We create a situation where Carver cannot kill everyone fast enough to stop this from going public." "What about FBI?" Thomas asked through the radio from his rooftop position. "What about Justice Department?" "Compromise," Brennan said. "Carver has been in CIA for 30 years. She has cultivated relationships throughout the government. We do not know who she controls and who she does not. We trust only people I have personal history with, people who owe me enough that they will risk their careers to do what is right." "How do we distribute?" Rachel asked. "We cannot just email classified documents. The moment we send them electronically, Carver's people intercept. We need physical delivery, old school." "We split up," Hawthorne said. 6 of us, 3 destinations, 2 people per delivery team. Redundancy. If one team gets intercepted, the others still make it through. "That leaves this house undefended," Thomas said. leaves Sarah exposed. Sarah looked up from her work, eyes carrying the same intensity her father got when making combat decisions. I am not staying here hiding while everyone else takes risks. I am coming. I can handle myself. No, Brennan said, absolutely not. This is too dangerous. Which is exactly why I need to be involved, Sarah replied. You think Carver will ignore me just because I stayed home? You think she will leave me alone out of mercy? I am already a target. At least let me be a target who is useful. The logic was brutal and correct. They all knew it. Carver would eliminate everyone connected to this operation. Sarah's safety depended not on hiding, but on ensuring the evidence reached people who could act on it. If they succeeded, if they exposed Carver publicly, there would be no point in killing witnesses. If they failed, Sarah would die regardless of where she was. Fine, Brennan said, but you stay with me. We do not separate. They spent the next 90 minutes preparing. Sarah created 6 identical USB drives, each containing the complete archive of evidence, encrypted, password protected, accompanied by a document summarizing the key findings for people who did not have time to read 10,000 pages. Rachel wrote affidavits explaining how she had gathered the information, certifying its authenticity, providing context that would make it credible to people who had never heard of Shadow Protocol. Hawthorne checked weapons, distributed ammunition, ensured everyone had communications equipment and medical supplies. The preparations were familiar, the routine of soldiers getting ready for operations that might go wrong. But this time felt different. This time they were not following orders from above. They were acting on their own authority, their own sense of right and wrong, their own willingness to risk everything for a principle that institutions had abandoned. The cyber attack intensified. Sarah's fingers flew across keyboards, building digital walls faster than Carver's people could tear them down. But it was a losing battle. Eventually they would break through. Eventually they would find the files and delete them. The only question was whether that would happen before or after the physical copies reached their destinations. We need to move, Sarah said. I can give you maybe 30 more minutes. After that, they are in and we lose everything. They divided into teams. Brennan and Sarah would take the evidence to Senator Mitchell in Washington, D.C. Rachel and Thomas would deliver to Colonel Hayes at the Pentagon. Hawthorne would go alone to Judge Thornton in Denver. 3 different directions, 3 different timelines, maximum distribution of risk and opportunity. You should not go alone, Thomas said to his father. If Carver sends people after you, if they intercept, you will be outnumbered. I have been outnumbered before, Hawthorne replied. Besides, someone has to be the decoy. If they are tracking me, they are not tracking you. You get Rachel to Hayes. Make sure that evidence reaches someone who can use it. That is what matters. Thomas wanted to argue, but he understood the tactical logic. Sometimes the best way to protect people was to draw fire away from them. Sometimes being the target was an act of love. They moved to the garage where 3 vehicles waited. Brennan's truck, Sarah's sedan, Hawthorne's pickup. Each vehicle had been checked for tracking devices, each gas tank filled, each emergency kit stocked with supplies for a journey that might take days if they had to go to ground. Hawthorne pulled Thomas aside while the others loaded equipment. If something happens to me, he said quietly, if this goes wrong and I do not make it, there are things you need to know. The ranch is yours. All the papers are in a safe deposit box at First Montana Bank in Great Falls. Combination is your birthday backwards. Everything I own goes to you, not because it is much, but because you are my son, and I should have said that more often. Thomas's jaw worked, emotions barely controlled. You are going to make it. We are all going to make it. Maybe, Hawthorne said, but in case we do not, in case this is the last time we talk, I need you to know I am proud of you. Proud of the man you became despite having me as a father. Your mother would be proud too. You are better than I ever was. They embraced, awkward but genuine, 2 men who had learned too late how to bridge the distance between them. When they separated, both had tears in their eyes that neither acknowledged. Rachel approached, handed Hawthorne one of the USB drives. This one has extra documentation, she said. Affidavits from other Shadow Protocol operators who are willing to testify. People Carver thought she controlled, but who are ready to talk. If anything happens to the other copies, this one alone can bring her down. Why give it to me? Because you are going alone. Because you are the most likely to be intercepted. And because if Carver focuses all her resources on stopping you, the others have a better chance of getting through. You are not just delivering evidence. You are being the sacrifice that saves everyone else. Hawthorne took the drive, slipped it into a pocket close to his chest. I have been the sacrifice before. Got good at it over 50 years. Just make sure this time you survive it, Rachel said. Thomas needs you more than he knows, more than you know. The three vehicles left simultaneously, scattering in different directions. Hawthorne watched the other two disappear in his rearview mirror, then focused on the road ahead. Denver was 800 miles southeast, 14 hours of driving through territory where Carver could position people at any choke point, 14 hours of being hunted. He took back roads, avoiding highways where surveillance was easy, drove through small towns that had never heard of CIA or Shadow Protocol, or the kind of war that happened in government offices rather than foreign deserts. The landscape was America at its most ordinary: farmland and forest, gas stations and diners, people living lives that would never intersect with what Hawthorne carried. 4 hours into the drive, his phone rang. Number he did not recognize. He almost ignored it, but instinct said answer. Colonel Hawthorne, the voice was female, professional, familiar. This is Deputy Director Carver. We need to talk. We have nothing to discuss. Oh, I think we do. You are currently driving south on Route 87, approaching the Wyoming border. In your pocket, you carry a USB drive containing classified information that you obtained illegally. That makes you a criminal, Colonel. That makes you someone I have the authority to stop by any means necessary. Hawthorne checked his mirrors. No obvious tail, but that meant nothing. They could be tracking his phone, his vehicle, could have assets positioned ahead waiting for him to drive into their net. The information on that drive proves you are a criminal, he said. Proves you have been running illegal operations for a decade. Proves you had people killed to cover it up. Carver laughed, the sound empty of humor. Proves, Colonel, do you understand how classification works? Everything on that drive is classified, which means I decide what it proves. I can classify the evidence against me, can classify Rachel Morgan's testimony, can classify the entire investigation and make it disappear into archives that will not be open for 70 years. By the time anyone sees what you have, I will be dead of old age, and it will not matter. Then why call? Why warn me if you can just make this disappear? Because I am offering you a way out, a chance to walk away. You pull over right now, you destroy that drive. You call Thomas and Rachel and tell them to do the same. And I let all of you live. I let you go back to your ranch and your son and your quiet retirement. No charges, no consequences. Just walk away. And everyone you killed, everyone you used, they just do not matter? They matter as much as the thousands of people I saved by doing things that weak politicians did not have the courage to authorize. You think war is clean, Colonel? You think the way we keep this country safe is by following rules that our enemies ignore? I did what needed doing, made the hard calls, got my hands dirty so people like you could pretend to have clean hands while benefiting from the security I provided. The philosophy was familiar. Hawthorne had heard versions of it from commanders throughout his career. The argument that necessity justified methods, that protecting the tribe required becoming what the tribe claimed to oppose. It was seductive because it contained truth. The world was dangerous. Enemies did not follow rules. Sometimes victory required doing terrible things. But Hawthorne had also lived long enough to see where that philosophy led. Had watched good men become monsters by degrees, each compromise making the next compromise easier until they could no longer recognize themselves. Had carried 342 kills that haunted him precisely because he had followed orders without questioning whether those orders served justice or merely served power. I am not walking away, he said. Then you are choosing death. For yourself, for your son, for everyone you care about. Because I will not let this evidence reach anyone who can use it. I will burn your entire network to the ground. We'll make it look like Shadow Protocol attacked you. We'll craft a narrative where you are the villains and I am the hero who stopped you. That is how this works, Colonel. I control the story. I decide what people believe. The line went dead. Hawthorne drove in silence, processing the threat and the reality behind it. Carver was right about one thing. She had resources and authority and decades of practice at manipulating systems. Fighting her meant fighting an institution that had already decided he was the enemy. But institutions were made of people, and people could choose. The three operatives at the fire tower had chosen. Rachel had chosen. Thomas had chosen. Brennan had chosen. Each person who saw the evidence and decided that truth mattered more than orders was a crack in Carver's armor. His phone rang again. Different number. This time he recognized it. Vincent Kane. You should not have answered Carver's call, Kane said. Now she knows exactly where you are. Has teams moving to intercept. You have maybe 20 minutes before they box you in. How do you know what calls I answer? Because I have been tracking both of you, been listening to both sides, trying to figure out who is going to win so I know which side to be on when this is over. And what have you decided? That Carver is going to kill everyone and bury the evidence unless someone stops her. And that someone is probably going to die doing it. But at least they will die having tried. That is worth something. If you are trying to help, tell me where her teams are positioned. Kane gave coordinates, described vehicles and personnel counts. 3 roadblocks ahead, all within 50 miles, professional ambush positions that would force Hawthorne to either surrender or engage against superior numbers. There is one route they have not covered, Kane said. Old mining road that branches off in 12 miles. Not on any GPS, 4-wheel drive only, rough terrain. But it will get you around their positions and back onto main roads 50 miles south. Why help me? Because you showed me mercy when you could have killed me. Because mercy is rare enough that it should be repaid. And because maybe I am tired of being on the side that has to lie about what it does. Kane sent GPS coordinates for the mining road. Hawthorne adjusted his route, watching for the turnoff. Found it exactly where Kane said it would be, barely visible, more suggestion than actual road. He turned onto it, felt the truck lurch over rocks and ruts that had not seen maintenance in decades. The road climbed into mountains, switchbacks, and steep grades that tested the truck's transmission. Trees closed in on both sides, branches scraping paint, roots threatening to high-center the vehicle. This was not a route meant for modern trucks. This was a path cut by men with mules and determination over a century ago. But it worked. After 2 hours of brutal driving, he emerged onto paved road, 50 miles past where Carver's teams would have been waiting. He had slipped the net, bought himself time, proven that experience and local knowledge could defeat superior technology. The phone rang again. Thomas this time. Dad, we have a problem. Rachel and I are being followed. 3 vehicles, professional operators, trying to force us off the road. We are armed but outnumbered. Where are you? Route 15 north of Helena, maybe 30 minutes from the Pentagon. So close, but they are going to intercept before we get there. Can you lose them? Not without a fight. They know what they are doing. Former military, probably shadow protocol operators following Carver's orders. Then fight, Hawthorne said. You are a ranger. Rachel is the best sniper I ever trained. Between you, that is more combat experience than most platoons. Use it. Get that evidence to Hayes. That is all that matters. Copy that. Love you, Dad. The line went dead before Hawthorne could respond. Love you. Thomas had said it casually, almost as an afterthought, the way people do when they assume there will be time to say it again later. But Hawthorne knew better, knew that some conversations were final, whether you intended them to be or not. He pressed the accelerator, pushing the truck faster than was safe on mountain roads, desperate to reach Denver, to complete his part of the mission so he could help his son complete his. The USB drive in his pocket felt heavier than it should, weighted with lives and choices and the particular burden of knowing that failure meant everyone died for nothing. Another call. Brennan this time. Hawk, things are going sideways. Sarah and I are 10 miles from Senator Mitchell's office, but we picked up surveillance. Government vehicles. Maybe FBI. Maybe something else. They are not moving to intercept, but they are definitely tracking us. Can you complete the delivery? If they let us. But my gut says Carver has people inside Mitchell's office. Says she knew we would go to him and prepared for it. This might be a trap. Then abort. Find another route. Get the evidence to someone else. There is no one else, Brennan said quietly. Mitchell was our best shot, our most reliable contact. If he is compromised, if Carver owns him, then we are out of options. Not yet, Hawthorne said. I am 6 hours from Denver. Judge Thornton is still clean. Rachel and Thomas are almost to Hayes. 2 out of 3 can still work. You and Sarah go to ground. Protect that evidence. Wait for my signal. When I confirm Thornton has the files, you come out and deliver yours. Redundancy, belt, and suspenders. And if you do not make it to Thornton, then you find another judge, another senator, another honest person in a system full of corruption. You keep trying until someone listens or until they kill you. Those are the only options. Brennan was quiet for a moment. Mary would be proud of you, he said finally. Proud that you are fighting for something that matters. Proud that you are protecting Thomas. Proud that you finally figured out what is worth dying for. Tell Sarah I am sorry her wedding got interrupted. Sorry she got dragged into this. She deserves better. She is her mother's daughter, Brennan said. Tougher than both of us. She will be fine. The connection ended. Hawthorne was alone again with the road and the drive and the weight of what he carried. 6 hours to Denver. 6 hours for Carver to position people, to set traps, to prepare whatever reception she had planned for a 62-year-old man who had the audacity to challenge her. He drove through the afternoon and into evening. The landscape changed from mountains to plains, from forest to grassland, from the wild country where he felt comfortable to the flat expanse where cover was scarce and sight lines extended for miles. Bad terrain for someone being hunted. Good terrain for people doing the hunting. As darkness fell, his phone rang one more time. Rachel. We made it, she said. Hayes has the evidence. He is reviewing it now. Says it is enough. Says he can open an official investigation. Says Carver is finished. Carver. What about Thomas? Is he okay? Injured but alive. Took a round through his left arm. Nothing critical. Bone intact. We handled the tail. 3 hostiles neutralized, 2 detained for questioning. Your son is a hell of a fighter, Hawk. You trained him well. I did not train him. That was all the Army. All him. I just failed to break him. You are selling yourself short. He fights like you, thinks like you, has your instinct for when to be patient and when to be aggressive. That came from somewhere. That came from watching his father even when you thought he was not paying attention. Hawthorne felt something shift in his chest. Some weight he had been carrying since Thomas was born finally beginning to ease. His son was alive. His son had succeeded. His son had proven himself to be the warrior Hawthorne had always hoped he would become. Get him medical attention, Hawthorne said. Then get him somewhere safe. Carver is going to retaliate, is going to try to eliminate everyone before Hayes can act on the evidence. Already done. Hayes has us in protective custody, armed guards, safe location. We are locked down until this is over. Good. Stay there. Do not come out until you hear from me or Brennan. Do not trust anyone except each other. What about you? Where are you? 2 hours from Denver. 2 hours from delivering the final copy. After that, it is over. We win or we lose, but either way it is finished. Be careful, Hawk. Carver knows she is losing. Knows her only chance is to stop you before you reach Thornton. She is going to throw everything she has at you. I know. Then why are you still going? Why not let the evidence Hayes has be enough? Because enough might not be enough. Because redundancy is what keeps operations from failing. Because I told my son I would finish what his mother asked me to start. And because some things are worth doing even when you know they might kill you. Rachel was quiet for a moment. Daniel would have liked you, she said finally. Would have respected what you are doing. He died trying to expose Carver. Died believing the truth mattered more than his life. You are proving he was right. I am just doing what the soldiers do. Completing the mission. Protecting the people who matter. Your husband did not die for nothing. Rachel, we are going to make sure of that. He ended the call, focused on the road ahead. Denver appeared on the horizon, lights marking civilization, towers rising from plains like declarations that humans could impose order on chaos. It was a lie, of course. Cities were just larger versions of the mess that existed everywhere humans gathered. But they were beautiful lies, and sometimes beauty mattered even when it was false. Judge Thornton lived in a secure building downtown, the kind of place where federal judges stayed when they needed protection from the people they sentenced. Guards at the entrance, cameras covering every angle, protocols designed to prevent exactly the kind of delivery Hawthorne was attempting. He parked 3 blocks away, approached on foot, carrying the USB drive and Rachel's affidavits in a briefcase that looked official enough to pass casual inspection. The guard at the entrance checked his identification, called up to Thornton's office to confirm the appointment Brennan had arranged. Minutes passed. Hawthorne stood in the lobby with marble floors and brass fixtures in the particular atmosphere of places where power resides. Other people moved around him, lawyers and clerks and the machinery of justice grinding through its endless work. None of them knew that what he carried could bring down a deputy director of CIA. None of them knew they were witnessing the final act of a conspiracy that had killed dozens and corrupted institutions. The guard's phone rang. He listened, nodded, gestured for Hawthorne to proceed. 10th floor, suite 1045. Judge Thornton is expecting you. The elevator ride felt longer than it should, time stretching in the way it does when adrenaline sharpens perception. Hawthorne watched the numbers climb, checked his reflection in the polished brass doors, saw an old man who looked tired and determined and ready for whatever came next. The doors opened. He stepped into a hallway that was too quiet. No sound of office work. No conversations behind closed doors. Just silence and the particular quality of emptiness that meant something was wrong. He drew his pistol, moved along the wall, professional clearing patterns from 50 years of practice. Suite 1045 stood at the end of the hall, door slightly open, light spilling out. Every instinct screamed trap. Every calculation said walk away. But the mission was delivery, and the mission was not complete. He pushed the door open with his foot, weapon up, ready for threats. The office was empty, furniture overturned, papers scattered, signs of struggle, and in the center of the room, Judge Thornton's body, 2 shots to the chest, professional execution. Behind him, the elevator dinged, doors opening, footsteps in the hallway, multiple people moving with tactical precision. Hawthorne was trapped. The trap had been sprung, and somewhere Elizabeth Carver was watching, confident that she had finally eliminated the last person who could stop her. Hawthorne moved to the window, looked down 10 stories to street level. Too far to jump, too exposed to defend. He was cornered in a room with one exit and hostile forces controlling that exit. The mathematics of survival did not work. But mathematics had never been the only factor. There was also will. There was also the choice to fight, even when fighting was futile. There was also the understanding that how you lost mattered as much as whether you won. He pulled the USB drive from his pocket, looked at it one final time. Everything Rachel had gathered. Everything that could destroy Carver. Everything that could give meaning to all the deaths and sacrifices. He could not deliver it to Thornton, but maybe he could ensure it reached someone. The window did not open, but it could be broken. He grabbed a chair, smashed the glass, felt cold Denver air rush in. 10 stories down, the street held cars and pedestrians and the ordinary flow of city life. He took the USB drive, wrapped it in Rachel's affidavit, attached a note with 3 words: Judge Thornton, evidence, urgent. Then he threw it as hard as he could, watched it arc through the night, fall toward the street below, hoping someone would find it, hoping someone would understand, hoping that even if he died here, the truth would survive. The office door burst open. 6 operators in tactical gear, weapons raised, professional precision. They fanned out, covered angles, moved like men who had done this 1,000 times. At the center, Elizabeth Carver stepped through, wearing a business suit and an expression of complete confidence. Colonel Hawthorne, she said, end of the line. You have caused me considerable trouble, cost me resources, forced me to accelerate timelines. All of this could have been avoided if you had just taken my offer and walked away. Hawthorne kept his weapon trained on her, knowing it was useless, knowing her people would kill him the instant he fired, but maintaining the gesture because some gestures mattered even when they were meaningless. Rachel delivered to Hayes, he said. Thomas is safe. Brennan has another copy. You have already lost. Killing me changes nothing. Carver smiled. Hayes is compromised. I own him. Any investigation he opens will lead exactly where I want it to lead. Thomas and Rachel are in protective custody that I control. They will have an unfortunate accident before they can testify. Brennan will be arrested for treason. His evidence will be classified and destroyed, and you will die here, another casualty of Shadow Protocol terrorism. I write the story, Colonel. I always have. Then why not just shoot me? Why talk? Because I want you to understand before you die. Want you to know that everything you did was futile. Every sacrifice was wasted. Every person who trusted you will die because you gave them false hope. That is my gift to you, the knowledge that you failed everyone who mattered. Hawthorne looked at her, saw the absolute certainty of someone who had won so many times that losing was inconceivable, saw the corruption that came from decades of unchecked power, saw what he might have become if he had not had people like Mary and Thomas and Brennan to remind him what mattered. You are wrong about one thing, he said. The sacrifices were not wasted. Because they taught my son what is worth fighting for. They showed Rachel that truth matters more than survival. They proved to Brennan that honor is not dead. You might kill us, but you cannot kill what we stood for, cannot erase the example we set, and eventually someone else will come. Someone else will challenge you, and maybe they will succeed where we failed. Carver's smile faded. Shoot him, she said to her operators. The sound that followed was not gunfire. It was the crash of the door being breached, the shout of federal agents identifying themselves, the sudden chaos of an operation being interrupted by forces no one had anticipated. FBI, someone shouted. Everyone on the ground now. Carver turned, saw a dozen agents flooding the room, saw her operators being disarmed and restrained, saw her carefully constructed trap collapsing around her. Her face showed the first expression Hawthorne had seen that was not complete confidence. Confusion, fear, the realization that she had not accounted for everything. An agent approached Hawthorne, badge held high. Colonel, we need you to lower your weapon. You are safe. Deputy Director Carver is under arrest. Hawthorne lowered his pistol, released the tension he had been holding, felt his legs nearly buckle from the adrenaline crash. Who sent you? Senator Mitchell, the agent replied. He received evidence 20 minutes ago. USB drive that was thrown from this window. A civilian found it, recognized the address, brought it to building security. Security called FBI. We got here as fast as we could. The USB drive, the desperate throw, the hope that someone would find it and understand. It had worked, against all probability, against every logical expectation. It had worked. Carver was being handcuffed, read her rights. The machinery of justice finally catching up to someone who had believed she was beyond its reach. She looked at Hawthorne with something between hatred and respect. You should have died, she said. Should have fallen like everyone else I eliminated. But you survived. How? Luck, Hawthorne said. Stubbornness. The help of people who believed doing the right thing was worth the cost. Take your pick. She was led away, operators following in handcuffs. The entire team that had been seconds from executing him, now facing justice themselves. The FBI agents secured the scene, photographed evidence, began the careful documentation that would turn what happened here into court cases and congressional hearings, and the slow grinding of institutional accountability. Hawthorne walked to the broken window, looked down at the street where someone had found a USB drive and changed the course of events, looked up at the Montana stars barely visible through Denver's light pollution, thought about Thomas recovering from his wound, about Rachel finally able to stop hiding, about Brennan and Sarah safe and able to plan that interrupted wedding. His phone rang. Thomas. Dad, we heard. FBI called Hayes, told us Carver is in custody, told us you made it. Are you okay? I am alive, Hawthorne said. That is about the best I can manage right now. You did it. You actually did it. Took down a deputy director of CIA. Exposed a conspiracy that reached the top of government. That is going to be legendary. It is going to be forgotten within a year, Hawthorne replied. Classified and filed away. Our names redacted from every report. That is how these things work. But we know. And the people we save know, and that has to be enough. When can you come home? Soon. Few days. Need to give statements. Need to ensure they actually prosecute Carver instead of just transferring her to a different agency. Need to make sure this is really over. Will you still come to the wedding? Sarah said she wants to reschedule, wants all of us there, wants to prove that the good guys sometimes win. I will be there, Hawthorne said. Front row, wouldn't miss it. Good, because I want you to be my best man. Want you standing beside me when I make those vows. Want you to see that we get second chances, that broken things can be repaired. I would be honored. They talked for a few more minutes. Careful conversation from two men still learning how to be father and son, still building a relationship from the ruins of decades of absence. When the call ended, Hawthorne stood alone in the destroyed office with federal agents working around him and felt something close to peace. The cost had been high, Judge Thornton dead, other casualties Hawthorne did not yet know about, psychological scars that would take years to fade. But they had won, had proven that individuals could challenge institutions. That truth could survive, even when power tried to bury it. That mercy shown to Vincent Kane had paid dividends in unexpected ways. An FBI agent approached, young enough to be Hawthorne's grandson, carrying a tablet that needed his signature. Colonel, we need your statement. Every detail you remember. This is going to be one of the biggest cases in CIA history. Hawthorne took the tablet, began the long process of documentation, turned 62 years and 342 kills and a lifetime of service into words that lawyers and judges and historians would study. Turned private pain into public record, turned classified operations into evidence of crimes. The work took hours. By the time he finished, dawn was breaking over Denver, painting the mountains west of the city in shades of gold and pink. The same mountains that had hidden him when Carver's people hunted him. The same landscape that had witnessed 1,000 personal battles as profound as any foreign war. He walked out of the building into morning air that smelled of snow and exhaust, and the particular scent of cities waking up. People moved past him, heading to work, starting their days, completely unaware that the world had shifted slightly toward justice during the night. A text from Brennan. Sarah and I are safe, evidence delivered to Mitchell despite surveillance. He confirmed everything. Carver is finished. Well done, Hawk. Mary would be proud. Another from Rachel. Hayes opened an official investigation. Shadow protocol is being dismantled. All remaining operators either arrested or cooperating. Your son is resting. Wound is clean. He will make full recovery. Thank you for everything. One more from Thomas. Love you, Dad. See you soon. Hawthorne read them all, saved them, began the long drive back to Montana, back to his ranch, back to the life he had thought was over when Brennan called 5 days ago and asked him to protect a wedding. 5 days that had felt like 5 years. 5 days that had changed everything. The road stretched ahead, empty and clean. Morning sun making the pavement shine. Hawthorne drove and thought about second chances, about redemption, about the possibility that even broken men could be repaired if they were willing to do the work. Somewhere ahead, his son was recovering. His friends were safe. His enemies were facing justice. The debts he had carried for 50 years were finally being paid. Not erased, debts like that never got erased, but balanced by new credits, new actions, new choices that proved he was more than the sum of his kills. The ranch would be waiting, the horses would need feeding, the fence would still need repair. All the ordinary work of ordinary life that he had neglected for so long while serving institutions that had not always deserved his service. But now he would do that work knowing his son would visit, knowing Rachel would call, knowing Brennan and Sarah would invite him to their family dinners, knowing he was part of something larger than himself. Not a weapon, not a tool, a father, a friend, a man. The road curved through mountains that held memory, that had witnessed his journey from broken soldier to something approaching whole. Hawthorne followed that road home toward whatever came next, toward the life he had earned through sacrifice and pain and the ultimate choice to show mercy when killing would have been easier. Behind him, the sun climbed higher, burning away the darkness, proving once again that dawn follows night, that light survives, that hope persists even in the longest winters. And ahead, Montana waited, patient and forgiving, ready to welcome back a warrior who had finally learned that the hardest battles are not fought with rifles across impossible distances, but with words and presence and the simple act of showing up for the people who matter. Spring came to Montana the way it always did, slowly and with great reluctance, winter holding on through April, before finally surrendering to mud and new grass and the return of birds that had spent the cold months in gentler climates. The ranch looked different in this light, softer somehow, the harsh edges of winter giving way to the possibility of growth. Hawthorne stood on his porch watching the sunrise paint the mountains in colors that reminded him why he had chosen this place to end his war. 3 months had passed since Denver, 3 months of depositions and hearings, and the slow machinery of justice grinding toward conclusions. Elizabeth Carver sat in a federal detention center, awaiting trial on charges that would keep her imprisoned for the rest of her life. Conspiracy, murder, treason. The list went on for pages, each count representing lives destroyed, operations corrupted, trust betrayed. Her lawyers argued that she had been protecting national security, that her actions fell within the scope of her authority, that everything she had done was sanctioned by someone higher up the chain. But the evidence Rachel had gathered was too complete, too detailed, too damning. Financial records proved she had been stealing from black budgets to fund personal operations. Communications logs showed her ordering assassinations of American citizens without legal authority. Testimony from Shadow Protocol operatives demonstrated that she had manufactured threats to justify expanded powers. The case against her was so overwhelming that even sympathetic judges could not ignore it. The fallout had been extensive. 3 senators had resigned. 2 generals had retired early. The CIA director had been forced out and replaced by someone who promised reform and transparency, promises that would likely prove as empty as all the previous promises, but that at least acknowledged the need for change. Congressional oversight committees held hearings where Hawthorne and Brennan testified behind closed doors, their words classified but their impact visible in the legislation that followed. Shadow Protocol was officially disbanded for the second time, this time with actual accountability. The remaining operators faced courts-martial or plea agreements. Some cooperated, providing evidence about operations that dated back decades. Others refused, taking their secrets to military prisons where they would die forgotten. Vincent Kane remained at large, disappeared into whatever networks allowed men like him to vanish when the alternative was facing justice. But that was government business. Institutional response. The slow turning of wheels that never quite ground as fine as they should. What mattered to Hawthorne was smaller, more personal. His son called twice a week. Rachel had moved to a cabin 20 miles from his ranch, close enough to visit, far enough to maintain independence. Brennan and Sarah had rescheduled the wedding for the first Saturday in June, outdoor ceremony, small gathering, just family and friends who had survived everything together. Hawthorne had been asked to be Thomas's best man. The invitation had come in person, Thomas driving to the ranch, sitting on this same porch, speaking words that carried weight beyond their surface meaning. "I want you standing beside me," he had said. "Want you to be part of the most important day of my life. Want to prove that we get second chances, that broken things can be repaired." Hawthorne had accepted, not trusting his voice to say more than yes, knowing that this was his son offering forgiveness for a lifetime of absence, offering the opportunity to be the father he should have been from the beginning. Some gifts were too precious to do anything except accept with gratitude and humility. The months since Denver had been strange, a kind of peace Hawthorne had not experienced since before Mary died. He worked on the ranch, repairing fences and cleaning stalls and doing the ordinary labor that kept horses alive and land productive. He ate regular meals. He slept through most nights without waking from nightmares. He attended a support group for combat veterans at the VA hospital in Great Falls, sitting in a circle with men who understood what it meant to carry violence long after the shooting stopped. At first he had said nothing, just listened to younger men talk about Afghanistan and Iraq, about IEDs and firefights and the friends they had left in desert sand. But eventually he had spoken, haltingly, about his own wars, about the 342 kills that haunted him, about the cost of being good at something terrible. The other men had listened without judgment, recognizing their own stories and his, understanding that the specific wars changed, but the damage remained constant. One of them, a Marine sergeant who had lost both legs in Fallujah, had said something that Hawthorne returned to often. "We did not get to choose what we were asked to do, but we get to choose what we do with what we learned. We get to choose whether the damage defines us or whether we use it to understand people who hurt the way we hurt." The words had resonated because they offered a path forward, a way to transform violence into compassion, to take the knowledge earned through breaking and use it for healing. Hawthorne had started volunteering at the VA, talking with younger veterans, sharing his experience, offering the kind of mentorship he wished someone had offered him 50 years ago. The work was hard, often futile. Many of the men he talked with were too broken to accept help. But some listened, some took the advice, some made it one more day because someone who understood told them that survival was possible. Rachel came for dinner once a week, usually Thursday nights, arriving with wine and stories about her new life. She had taken a job teaching advanced marksmanship at a private security firm, training bodyguards and executive protection specialists, using her skills in ways that did not require killing. She talked about her students with the same enthusiasm Hawthorne remembered from when she had been learning the craft. That sense of purpose that came from being good at something and using that skill to protect rather than destroy. They never talked directly about Daniel, about the husband she had lost and spent 2 years avenging. But his presence was in every conversation, every reference to doing work that mattered, every acknowledgement that the living had obligations to the dead. She wore his wedding ring on a chain around her neck, visible when she leaned forward, a reminder of what had been lost and what had been preserved through loss. One Thursday evening, sitting on the porch with the sun setting and the first stars appearing, she had asked the question that Hawthorne had been avoiding for 3 months. Do you regret it? Letting Cain go? Showing him mercy? Every day, Hawthorne had replied, and not at all. Both things are true at the same time. He is still out there, still capable of damage. But if I had killed him, if I had chosen revenge over mercy, I would have become what he was. Would have proven that the only response to violence is more violence. Sometimes you have to break the cycle, even when breaking it costs you. Rachel had nodded, understanding in the way only someone who had killed could understand. Daniel used to say that the hardest thing about being a soldier was knowing when to stop being a soldier, knowing when the war was over, even when the enemy was still fighting. You figured that out. That is more than most of us ever manage. The conversation had stayed with Hawthorne, returning in quiet moments, validating the choice he had made, even as he wondered about the consequences still unfolding. Cain was alive somewhere, probably watching, probably waiting, probably planning whatever came next. But he was also someone who had been shown mercy when execution would have been easier. That had to mean something. That had to change the calculus in ways Hawthorne could not predict, but hoped would lead somewhere other than more violence. Thomas visited most weekends, sometimes with Sarah, sometimes alone. They worked on the ranch together, fixing the 100 small things that 50 years of neglect had broken, replaced rotted fence posts, repaired the barn roof, painted the house trim, physical labor that let them exist side by side without the pressure of constant conversation, finding a rhythm of work that felt like the beginning of something sustainable. One Saturday afternoon, covered in paint and sweat, they had sat on the porch drinking beer and watching the horses graze. Thomas had spoken quietly, not looking at his father, words coming slow but determined. I need to tell you something about the 3 years I did not call, about why I stayed away even when Mom was sick. You do not owe me explanations, Hawthorne had said. Yes, I do, because you think it was your fault. Think you drove me away by being a bad father. But that is not what happened. I stayed away because I was angry, not at you specifically, at what you represented, at the fact that you had given so much to the military that there was nothing left for us. I wanted to prove I could be a better soldier and a better man, could serve without sacrificing family. And then I spent 18 months undercover, lying to the woman I love, becoming exactly what I had hated about you. That is why I finally understand, why I can forgive, because I learned how hard it is to balance duty and family, how easy it is to choose wrong even when you mean to choose right. Hawthorne had set down his beer, looked at his son, seen the man he had become despite rather than because of his father's example. You are already better than I was. Already figured out at 35 what took me 60 years to learn. You have time to do it right. Time to be the father and the husband I never was. Do not waste that time. I am trying, Thomas had said. Every day I am trying. And having you here, having you in my life again, that helps. That shows me what is possible, even when you think you have broken everything beyond repair. They had sat together until the sun set, father and son, two men shaped by war, but trying to build something that transcended war, trying to prove that violence did not have to be hereditary, that each generation could choose differently than the one before. The morning of the wedding arrived with clear skies and temperatures warm enough that the outdoor ceremony would be comfortable. Hawthorne woke at dawn, made coffee, stood on his porch watching light spread across the valley. He thought about Mary, about how she would have loved to see this day, to watch their son marry someone who made him better, to witness the family being rebuilt after years of fragmentation. He whispered to her memory, hoping that wherever she was, if she was anywhere, she could see this moment and know that he had finally figured out what mattered. He drove to Great Falls in the early afternoon, wearing the dress uniform he had not put on since his retirement ceremony 5 years ago. The medals felt heavier than he remembered, each ribbon representing operations and kills and decisions that had seemed clear at the time, but that looked more complicated in retrospect. The uniform still fit, barely, his body changed by age, but not so much that the tailoring failed. Looking in the mirror, he saw the young Marine who had gone to war 50 years ago, still visible beneath the weathered face, still present in the eyes that had seen too much. The wedding venue was Brennan's property, 5 acres of manicured lawn and gardens backing onto National Forest. 100 chairs faced an arch covered in white roses. String quartet played classical music that Hawthorne did not recognize, but found beautiful in the way that organized sound could be beautiful when skilled people created it. Guests arrived, military and civilian mixed. Everyone dressed well, everyone carrying the particular energy of people gathering to witness hope. Hawthorne arrived early, found Thomas in a side room where the groom was adjusting his tie for the fifth time, nervous energy unable to find outlet. His son looked young in his dress uniform, impossibly young, though he was 35 and had seen combat in 2 wars. The wounded arm had healed cleanly, barely a scar, the kind of injury that looked dramatic when it happened, but that the body absorbed and repaired with time. "You look good," Hawthorne said. "I look terrified," Thomas replied. "What if I mess this up? What if I say the wrong thing? What if I prove that I am not ready for this?" "Then you'll recover and try again." That is what marriage is, continuous trying. Your mother and I had 40 years together. I messed up constantly, but she kept giving me chances, kept believing I could be better than I was. That is what love does. It gives you room to fail and space to try again. Did you ever think you would lose her? That she would die and leave you alone? Every day, every deployment, every mission, every time I said goodbye, I thought it might be the last. But I went anyway. Did the work I thought was important. And when she bowed, when I finally had all the time in the world, she was not there to share it. That is the cost of choosing wrong. Do not make my mistake. Do not prioritize anything over the person you love. Thomas nodded, absorbing the advice, using it to settle his nerves. They stood together, father and son, preparing for the transition that would change Thomas from husband-to-be to husband, from ranger to family man, from the identity built through war to the identity built through love. The ceremony began at 4 in the afternoon, golden lights slanting through the trees, temperature perfect, the world cooperating in ways that felt like blessing. Hawthorne walked Thomas down the aisle. Reverse tradition, the father giving the son away, symbolism that felt appropriate given their history. He took his position beside Thomas at the altar, standing as best man, as witness, as representative of family that had survived against considerable odds. Sarah walked down the aisle with Brennan, her dress simple and elegant, her face radiant with happiness that had survived terrorism and conspiracy, and the discovery that the man she loved had been lying to her for 18 months. She had chosen to forgive, chosen to understand, chosen to believe that people could be more than their worst moments. That choice, more than anything in the ceremony itself, represented what marriage required. The priest spoke words that had been spoken at 10,000 weddings, promises ancient and familiar, asking Thomas and Sarah to commit to each other through whatever came next. They exchanged vows, personalized, emotional, speaking directly to each other rather than performing for the crowd. Thomas promised to be present, to prioritize family, to choose love over duty when the choice mattered. Sarah promised to understand, to support, to build a life that honored both their needs. They were good promises, realistic rather than romantic, acknowledging that marriage was work and choosing to do that work together. When the priest asked if anyone objected, silence held for the traditional moment. Then, from the back of the gathering, a voice spoke. "I object, not to the marriage, but to the lie we are all pretending is not happening here." Heads turned. Vincent Kane stood at the edge of the ceremony, dressed in civilian clothes, unarmed, hands visible, making no threatening moves but undeniably present. Security personnel moved to intercept him, but Brennan raised a hand, stopping them. Kane walked forward, calm and deliberate, stopping at a respectful distance from the altar. "I know I am not welcome," he said. "Know that half the people here would prefer me in prison or dead, but I came to say something that needs saying, to admit something that has been eating at me for 3 months." "What?" Hawthorne asked, stepping between Kane and Thomas, protective instinct overriding everything else. "That you were right, that showing me mercy changed something. I have spent 3 months running, hiding, planning revenge, planning ways to hurt the people who hurt me. But I could not do it, could not pull the trigger, because you proved that there are still people who choose right over easy, who choose mercy over vengeance, who remember that enemies are still human. I am here to surrender, to face trial, to accept consequences, because you showed me that accepting consequences is possible. That redemption, if it exists at all, requires that." He pulled something from his pocket slowly, showing it was not a weapon. A USB drive. "This contains everything I know. Every Operation Shadow Protocol ran, every person involved, every crime committed. You have Rachel's evidence. Now you have mine. Between them, you can clean house, can root out everyone who was part of Carver's network, can actually reform the system instead of just putting Band-Aids on corruption. Brennan stepped forward, took the drive, examined it carefully. Why now? Why wait 3 months? Because I needed to know you would actually use the evidence. Needed to see if Carver would face trial or if she would be protected, like we were protected until we became inconvenient. She is in prison. Hayes opened investigations. Reform is happening. That means the system might actually work, might actually punish the people who deserve punishment. I want to be part of that, want to testify, want to help clean up the mess I helped make. You will spend the rest of your life in prison, Hawthorne said. I know. Kane's voice was steady. But at least I will spend it having done one thing right, one thing that honors my brother's memory by holding the people who used him accountable. That is worth whatever comes next. Security personnel moved forward, placed Kane in handcuffs, led him away. He went without resistance, looking back once at Hawthorne, nodding acknowledgement, wordless communication between two soldiers who had chosen different paths but ended up at similar destinations. The ceremony resumed after a long pause, everyone processing what had happened, understanding that even weddings could be interrupted by the ongoing work of justice. The priest continued, speaking about forgiveness and new beginnings and the possibility that people could change. The words carried additional weight now, demonstrated in real time by a man who had been an enemy choosing to become something else. Thomas and Sarah exchanged rings, simple gold bands that reflected light. They kissed, sealing promises made in front of family and friends in the unexpected witness of someone who had tried to kill them all, but who had been transformed by mercy. The gathering applauded, stood, celebrated the union of two people who had survived everything and chosen to build something new from the wreckage. The reception happened in a tent adjacent to the ceremony space, dinner and dancing, and the ordinary joy of people gathering to celebrate love. Hawthorne sat at the head table beside Rachel, watching Thomas and Sarah dance their first dance, seeing the happiness on their faces, the relief of people who had made it through fire and found each other on the other side. Rachel leaned close, spoke quietly. Kane surrendering because you showed him mercy. That is poetic justice. That is the universe demonstrating that choosing right has consequences beyond what we can predict. Or it is just a broken man finding the only exit he could live with, Hawthorne replied. Do not romanticize it. He is still going to prison, still facing consequences. Mercy did not erase what he did. No, but it changed what he will do. That is worth something. They danced later, Hawthorne and Rachel, awkward but genuine, two people who had spent their lives becoming weapons trying to remember how to be human. Other couples joined them, the floor filling with people who had survived combat and betrayal and the long, slow damage of serving institutions that did not always deserve their service. They danced and talked and celebrated, and for a few hours the wars they had fought felt distant enough to coexist with joy. Brennan found Hawthorne near midnight, pulled him aside, handed him a glass of expensive whiskey. To absent friends, he said, raising his glass. To Mary, to your father, to Rachel's husband, to everyone who should be here but is not. They drank, the whiskey burning in the way good whiskey does, pain and pleasure mixed, appropriate for toasting the dead. They stood together, looking at the celebration, watching their children dance, seeing the future being built by people who would not make all the same mistakes, but who would make different ones, progressing incrementally towards something better. I could not have done this without you, Hawthorne said. Any of this, without you taking care of my son when I could not, without you giving me this mission, without you trusting me when I made the choice to let Kane go. You would have done the same for me, Brennan replied. Actually, you did do the same for me in 1968, on Hill 881, when my father saved your platoon, when he died so I could live. We have been repaying that debt for 50 years. Maybe we can finally call it even. Debts between brothers are never even, but we can stop counting. They shook hands, then embraced. Two old men who had survived when many had not, who had carried each other through decades, who had learned that the only thing worth fighting for was each other. The party continued past midnight, young people dancing while old soldiers told stories, families mixing, the ordinary magic of weddings bringing together people who might never otherwise meet. Hawthorne watched it all, feeling his age in every joint, feeling the weight of 62 years and 342 kills, but also feeling something else: contentment, the sense that he had done what needed doing, that he had protected people who mattered, that he had chosen mercy when revenge would have been easier, and that choice had rippled outward in ways he could not have predicted but could recognize as good. Thomas found him near the end of the evening, still in his dress uniform, though he had loosened the tie, looking happy and exhausted. Sarah waited near the car, ready to leave for a honeymoon that would take them somewhere far from Montana, somewhere warm where wars did not reach. "Thank you," Thomas said, "for being here, for standing beside me, for being the father I needed you to be, even if it took 60 years to figure it out." "Thank you for not giving up on me," Hawthorne replied, "for calling, for visiting, for giving me another chance when I did not deserve it. Everyone deserves another chance. You taught me that, by letting Cain go, by choosing mercy, by showing that forgiveness is stronger than revenge." They hugged, long and genuine, father and son connected in ways they had not been since Thomas was a child. When they separated, both had tears in their eyes that neither bothered to hide. Some emotions were too big to contain, too important to disguise. Thomas left with his bride, the car trailing cans and ribbons, traditional celebration of new beginnings. Other guests departed, the tent emptying, the celebration winding down in the way celebrations do when morning approaches and people remember they have lives to return to. Hawthorne was one of the last to leave, helping clean up, stacking chairs, breaking down tables, doing the ordinary work that weddings required. Rachel worked beside him, comfortable silence between them, partnership built on shared understanding of what it meant to survive. "What now?" she asked as they worked. "What do you do when the mission is complete? When the war is over? When you have finally paid all the debts?" "I do not know," Hawthorne admitted. "Never thought I would live long enough to find out. Never imagined a life that was not defined by killing or preparing to kill. But I suppose I learn. Suppose I figure out what retired actually means. Suppose I work on the ranch and see my son and try to be the man Mary always believed I could be." "That sounds good. That sounds like something worth doing. What about you? What is next for the ghost who came back to life?" "Same thing. Learning to be human again. Teaching people to protect instead of destroy. Maybe eventually dating. Maybe eventually rebuilding what I lost when Daniel died. Maybe eventually believing that happiness is possible even after everything." "It is possible," Hawthorne said. "I have seen it tonight. In Thomas. In Sarah. In all the people who refuse to let the damage define them. If they can do it, so can we." They finished cleaning as dawn approached, the Montana sky lightening from black to gray to the particular blue that promised a beautiful day. They stood together, watching the sunrise, two soldiers who had survived when many had not, who carried wounds that would never completely heal, but who had learned that healing was not the same as being whole, that you could be broken and still functional, damaged and still valuable, haunted and still capable of joy. The months that followed established a new rhythm. Thomas and Sarah returned from their honeymoon, moved into a house in Great Falls, close enough to visit but far enough to build their own life. They invited Hawthorne for Sunday dinners, traditional gathering of family, food and conversation, and the ordinary work of maintaining relationships. Sarah was pregnant by fall, the announcement made at Thanksgiving dinner, everyone crying happy tears, celebrating the continuation of generations, the perpetuation of family despite everything that had tried to destroy it. Hawthorne would be a grandfather. The realization was profound and terrifying in equal measure. He had failed as a father. Would he fail as a grandfather too? Would he repeat the same mistakes, choose the same wrong priorities, damage another generation through absence and emotional distance? But Thomas pulled him aside after the announcement, spoke words that addressed the fear without Hawthorne having to voice it. "You will not fail this time, because you learned, because you are different than you were, because you have the chance to do it right from the beginning, and because I will be there. We will do it together, learn together, figure out how to be parents who are present instead of absent." The support was everything. The partnership was what Hawthorne had needed for his entire life, but had never asked for because asking felt like weakness. Now, at 62, he was finally learning that strength came from accepting help, from admitting vulnerability, from building teams instead of operating alone. He started building a cradle in his workshop, working from plans he found online, learning woodworking skills he had never needed in a life spent mastering violence. The work was meditative, precise, demanding attention, but not requiring the life or death focus of combat. He cut and sanded and assembled, building something that would hold his grandchild, something that would last beyond his lifetime, something that represented creation instead of destruction. Rachel visited while he worked, watching him measure and cut, offering advice when the joints did not fit properly, sharing the space in comfortable silence. One afternoon, sitting in the workshop while Hawthorne wrestled with a particularly difficult corner, she spoke about Daniel. He wanted children, talked about it constantly, wanted to be the father his own father was not. But we kept delaying, kept saying we would start after the next deployment, after the next operation, after the war was over. But the war never ended, and then he died, and I never got to give him that. Never got to see him hold his child. Never got to watch him be the father he dreamed of being. I am sorry, Hawthorne said. Sorry you lost that. Sorry the timing was wrong. But watching Thomas and Sarah, watching you build that cradle, I realized that family continues even when individuals die. Daniel is gone, but the values he held, the kind of father he wanted to be, those can live through Thomas, through you, through the baby that is coming. That is a kind of immortality that matters. He would be proud of you, Hawthorne said. Proud that you survived. Proud that you exposed the people who killed him. Proud that you are still here fighting for what matters. I hope so. That is what keeps me going. The hope that he would be proud, that the life I am building honors the life we planned together. They sat together in the workshop, two broken people surrounded by sawdust and tools, building things that would outlast them, finding purpose in creation, discovering that the opposite of killing was not just not killing, but actively building, protecting, nurturing. Winter returned to Montana as it always did, cold and harsh and beautiful. Hawthorne split wood for the stove, fed the horses, repaired equipment that broke in the cold. The ranch required endless work, repetitive labor that some people found boring, but that Hawthorne found centering. Each task completed was proof of capability, demonstration that he could still be useful even as age diminished his body. He turned 63 in January. Quiet birthday, just him and Thomas and Sarah and Rachel sharing dinner at the ranch. They gave him gifts practical and thoughtful, new work gloves, a book about horse care, a photograph of Thomas and Sarah from the wedding in a frame made from wood salvaged from the barn. The evening was ordinary and precious, exactly what birthdays should be. Celebration of surviving another year, acknowledgement that time continued despite everything. In March, Sarah gave birth to a daughter, Emma Marie Hawthorne, 8 pounds, healthy, perfect. Thomas called Hawthorne at 2 in the morning with the news, voice shaking with exhaustion and joy. She is here, Dad. She is perfect. Can you come meet her? Hawthorne drove to Great Falls through snow that started falling as he left the ranch. Heavy spring snow that made driving treacherous, but that he navigated through decades of Montana winters. He arrived at the hospital at dawn, found Thomas in the waiting room looking like he had not slept in days, but happier than Hawthorne had ever seen him. The baby was tiny, impossibly fragile, wrapped in blankets and sleeping the deep sleep of newborns who did not yet know the world was anything other than warmth and safety. Hawthorne held her carefully, terrified he would drop her, amazed that something so small could feel so important. Sarah watched from the hospital bed, exhausted but smiling. She has your eyes, she said to Hawthorne. Thomas tried to argue, but I see it. She has the same eyes you have in your old pictures, before the wars changed them. Hawthorne looked down at his granddaughter, saw the truth in Sarah's words. Emma's eyes, when they opened briefly, were the same gray blue that had looked back at him from mirrors for 63 years. The same eyes that had looked through scopes at 342 targets. The same eyes that had watched friends die. The same eyes that had cried at Mary's funeral. But on Emma, they were clean, unmarked, full of possibility rather than memory. She would have his eyes, but not his damage. She would carry his genes, but not his trauma. That was the gift of generations, the chance to start fresh, the opportunity to be better than those who came before. You will tell her about me, Hawthorne asked, when she is older, when she asks about her grandfather. Of course, Thomas said, We'll tell her you were a soldier, that you served your country, that you made mistakes but learned from them, that you showed mercy when revenge would have been easier, that you were a complicated man who did the best he could with what he knew. That is more grace than I deserve. It is exactly what you deserve. You earned it through everything you did in Denver, everything you did to protect this family, everything you are still doing to be present. You earned the right to be remembered well. They stayed at the hospital until visiting hours ended, Hawthorne reluctant to leave, wanting to memorize every detail of his granddaughter's face, wanting to be present for as much of her life as time allowed. When he finally left, driving back to the ranch through clearing weather, he felt something he had not felt in decades. Hope. Not hope that the future would be easy, but hope that it would be possible, that Emma would grow up in a world slightly better than the one he had inherited, that the damage could be healed through time and attention and the simple act of choosing differently. The seasons turned. Emma grew, reaching milestones that Thomas documented obsessively. First smile, first laugh, first time rolling over. Hawthorne visited weekly, learning to be grandfather, learning to play and sing, and make silly faces that made the baby laugh. The work was nothing like combat, required different skills, different patience, different willingness to look foolish. But it was the most important work he had ever done, more important than the 342 kills, more important than the medals, more important than the 50 years spent serving institutions that had not always deserved his service. This was the work that would outlast him. This was the legacy that mattered. One Sunday afternoon in late summer, sitting on the porch while Emma napped inside, Thomas asked the question Hawthorne had been expecting. Do you regret it? The life you chose? The years in combat? The time away from Mom and from me? Hawthorne was quiet for a long time, thinking about the question, trying to find an answer that was honest without being destructive. I regret the con, he said finally. Regret the time I missed. Regret the damage I caused by choosing wrong so many times. But I do not regret the service itself. Do not regret standing between civilians and violence. Do not regret protecting people who could not protect themselves. What I regret is the belief that I had to choose, that I could not be both soldier and father. Both warrior and husband. I could have balanced it differently, could have said no to some missions, could have prioritized family more often. That is what I regret, not the service, the imbalance. Do you think I should stay in the Army? Sarah wants me to, says it is important work. But I see Emma and I wonder if I should get out now, before deployments take me away, before I miss the same things you missed. Only you can answer that. But I will tell you what I wish someone had told me. You can serve without sacrificing everything. You can deploy without disappearing. You can be a soldier and a father if you are intentional about it. If you set boundaries. If you remember that the family is the mission that matters most. I did not understand that. You can. The conversation continued as the sun set, father and son talking about how to balance duty and family, how to serve without being consumed by service, how to protect the world without losing connection to the people who made protection meaningful. It was the conversation Hawthorne wished they had when Thomas was younger, the guidance he wished someone had given him when he was making the same choices. But it was happening now. That was what mattered. As fall arrived and Emma approached 6 months old, Hawthorne received a letter. Official government envelope, return address from the Department of Defense. He opened it expecting bureaucratic correspondence, some final detail about his testimony or his pension. Instead, he found something different. The letter informed him that he was being awarded the Medal of Honor for his actions in Denver and Montana, for exposing corruption at the highest levels of government, for risking his life to protect civilians, for demonstrating the values that the military claimed to represent. The medal would be presented at a ceremony in Washington, D.C., attended by the president and recorded for history. Hawthorne read the letter 3 times, trying to understand why this mattered, why the government would honor someone who had defied orders, who had let a terrorist escape, who had operated outside official channels. Then he understood they were not honoring him. They were honoring the story they wanted to tell, the narrative of lone heroes standing against corruption, the myth that justice prevailed and institutions reformed. It was propaganda, well-intentioned perhaps, but propaganda nonetheless. The same machinery that had enabled Carver's corruption was now trying to repair its image by celebrating the person who exposed her. The irony was not lost on Hawthorne. He called Brennan. "What do you make of this?" The general laughed. "They are trying to control the narrative, trying to make this story about individual heroism instead of systemic failure. But you know what? Take the medal anyway. Not because you need validation, because it gives you a platform, gives you authority to continue pushing for reform, gives you credibility that cannot be dismissed. Use it. Make them regret giving it to you by continuing to be a pain in their ass." The ceremony happened in November, formal event at the White House, attended by politicians and generals and journalists who would write stories about American heroism and redemption. Thomas came in uniform, carrying Emma, wanting his daughter to see her grandfather honored, even though she was too young to understand. Sarah and Rachel attended, representing family and the women who had made survival possible. The president placed the medal around Hawthorne's neck, spoke words written by speechwriters, described actions in terms that made them sound cleaner than they had been, transformed messy reality into inspiring fiction. Hawthorne stood at attention, accepted the honor, understood that this was theater, but that theater sometimes served useful purposes. After the ceremony, during the reception, multiple reporters asked for interviews. Hawthorne declined most of them, uncomfortable with attention, unwilling to be reduced to sound bites and headlines. But he agreed to talk with one journalist, a veteran herself, someone who understood that the real stories were more complicated than the official versions. "Why did you do it?" she asked. "Why risk everything when you could have walked away?" "Because my son needed me to. Because people I cared about were in danger. Because someone had to prove that mercy was stronger than revenge. Take your pick. They are all true." "Do you think you made a difference? Do you think the system will actually change?" Hawthorne looked around the room full of politicians and generals, saw the same faces that had enabled Carver, that had ignored evidence, that had perpetuated corruption because reform was inconvenient. "No," he said, "I do not think the system will change. Systems do not change. People change. And maybe some of the people here tonight will remember that one old man stood up to institutional power and survived. Maybe that will inspire someone else to stand up next time. Maybe eventually enough individuals choosing right will force the system to adapt. But I am not holding my breath." "Then why accept the medal? Why participate in the ceremony?" "Because my granddaughter is here. Because I want her to grow up knowing that her grandfather, despite all his flaws, eventually figured out what mattered. That is worth participating in theater. That is worth accepting honors I do not deserve. Not for me, for her." The interview appeared in newspapers and magazines, quoted on television and radio, picked up by outlets around the world. For a week, Hawthorne was famous. The old sniper who exposed CIA corruption, the veteran who chose family over orders, the grandfather who proved redemption was possible. Then the news cycle moved on, as it always did, and Hawthorne returned to Montana, to the ranch, to the ordinary work of living a life that was finally his own instead of the government's. The medal went into a drawer with his other decorations, acknowledged but not displayed, part of his history but not the whole of his identity. Winter returned, Emma's first Christmas. The family gathered at Thomas and Sarah's house, 3 generations under one roof, opening presents and eating too much and building memories that would last longer than any medal. Emma received more gifts than any 6-month-old needed, spoiled by grandparents and parents alike, showered with the love that had been withheld from previous generations. Hawthorne sat in a corner watching it all, holding Emma when she fussed, singing to her when she cried, being present in ways he had not been present for Thomas, doing the work that mattered, building the relationship that would define his remaining years. As midnight approached, as the others cleaned up and prepared to sleep, Thomas found Hawthorne on the porch, looking at stars that blazed in the cold Montana sky. "Thank you," Thomas said, "for everything, for being here, for being the grandfather I always wanted you to be as a father, for proving that it is never too late to change." "Thank you for giving me the chance," Hawthorne replied, "for not writing me off, for believing I could be better than I was." They stood together in the cold, watching Emma through the window, the baby asleep in Sarah's arms, the future embodied in a child who would never know war, who would grow up protected by people who had learned through pain what protection required. "Think she will ask about the wars," Thomas said. "When she is older, think she will want to know what we did." "Probably. Children always want to know their parents' stories. When she asks, tell her the truth. Tell her we served. Tell her we killed. Tell her we made mistakes but tried to learn from them. Tell her that violence is sometimes necessary, but that it costs more than most people understand. Tell her that mercy matters, that choosing right matters, that family matters most. I will, and I will tell her about you, about how you protected her before she was born, about how you chose mercy when revenge would have been easier, about how you proved that even the most broken people can be repaired if they are willing to do the work. That is more credit than I deserve. I just did what needed doing. No, you did more than that. You showed us all how to be better. That is worth remembering. That is worth passing on. The night deepened. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, indifferent to human concerns, but beautiful nonetheless. Inside the house, Emma slept, dreaming whatever dreams infants dream, unaware that she was protected by people who had walked through fire and emerged transformed. Hawthorne thought about the long road that had led him here. From that hill in 1968, where he had saved Brennan's father, through 50 years of combat and killing, through Mary's death and Thomas's estrangement, through the cathedral in Denver and the choice to let Cain live. Every step had led to this moment, this family, this second chance. The debts he had carried for so long were finally paid. Not erased, debts like that never got erased, but balanced by credits, by choices made right, by relationships repaired, by the simple act of being present. He was 63 years old. His hands still shook. His body still carried scars. His mind still held 342 faces that haunted him. But he was also a father, a grandfather, a friend, a person who had learned that redemption was possible even for someone who had spent a lifetime learning to kill. That was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything. The Montana wind carried the scent of snow and pine and the promise of morning. Somewhere in the mountains, wolves howled at the cold stars. The world continued its ancient rhythms, unconcerned with individual human stories, vast and beautiful and utterly indifferent. But here on this porch in this moment, Hawthorne stood with his son and understood that individual stories were all that mattered. The small victories, the repaired relationships, the choice to build instead of destroy. Blood debts, he had learned, could be paid in more than blood. They could be paid in presence, in showing up, in choosing mercy, in standing beside your son and meeting your granddaughter and believing that the future could be different than the past. The work was not finished. It would never be finished. Each generation would face its own wars, its own choices, its own struggle to balance duty and family. But they would face those challenges together, as family, as team, as people who understood that the most important battles were not fought across impossible distances, but across dinner tables and in living rooms, and in the small moments that built or destroyed relationships. Hawthorne looked at his son, saw Mary's eyes and his own stubborn determination, and something new, something better, the possibility that emerged when people chose to learn from the past instead of repeating it. He thought about Emma sleeping inside, inheriting a world that was still broken, but that good people were trying to fix. He thought about all the ways things could still go wrong and all the ways things might go right. And he understood, finally, after 63 years and 342 kills and a Medal of Honor he did not deserve, that coming home was not a place. It was a choice, the choice to stop running, the choice to stand with people who mattered, the choice to build something that would outlast violence and prove that even the most damaged souls could find redemption if they were willing to do the work. The stars wheeled overhead, the wind carried winter's promise, and Colonel James Hawthorne, retired sniper, father, grandfather, stood on a Montana porch with his son beside him and knew that he had finally, after all these years, come home.